The reunion invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Expensive cardstock, gold embossing, words that smiled with teeth. Marcus Chen held it under the kitchen light, reading between the lines of false warmth. 10 years since graduation, and Brad Wellington still couldn't let it go. The golden boy. The king who never lost his crown. This wasn't an invitation. It was a stage, carefully built for one performance. Marcus's public destruction. His daughter Lily, 7 years old, watched him from the doorway. "Daddy, what's wrong?" Everything, he wanted to say. Instead, he folded the card and made a decision that would change everything. Before we begin, if you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it moves you, hit that like button. Now, let's dive in. The envelope had been sitting on Marcus Chen's kitchen counter for 3 days before he finally opened it. He'd recognized Brad Wellington's handwriting immediately. That confident, sweeping script that always seemed to take up more space than necessary. Even after 10 years, some things didn't change. Marcus worked the late shift at Morrison's Auto Repair, the kind of job where you went home with engine grease under your fingernails no matter how hard you scrubbed. It was honest work and he was grateful for it, but it wasn't the life anyone had predicted for him back in high school. Back when he'd been someone different, someone with possibilities. "Daddy, there's a fancy letter on the table," Lily called from the living room, where she was sprawled on the worn carpet, coloring with the concentration of a surgeon. At 7, she already had her mother's dark eyes and serious expression, the one that made Marcus's chest tight every time he saw it. "I know, sweetheart, just junk mail." "It doesn't look like junk, it's shiny." Marcus smiled despite himself. Nothing got past Lily. She was sharp as a tack, reading 2 grades above her level, asking questions that made him scramble for answers. She was the reason he got up every morning, the reason he kept going when every bone in his body wanted to quit. He picked up the envelope, feeling the weight of expensive paper. The return address was embossed. Wellington Estate, Riverside Drive. Of course. Brad's family had owned half of Riverside since before Marcus was born. Old money, the kind that came with country club memberships and private school legacies, and the absolute certainty that the world would always bend in your direction. Marcus had been on scholarship at West Ridge Academy. His mother had worked 3 jobs to cover what the scholarship didn't, to give him opportunities she'd never had. She'd been so proud the day he got in. He could still see her face, radiant with hope. That hope had died when she did, 6 months before graduation. He opened the envelope. "Dear Marcus, it's been far too long. Can you believe it's been 10 years since we walked across that stage together? Time flies, doesn't it? I'm organizing a West Ridge Academy class of 2015 reunion, and naturally, I thought of you. It wouldn't be complete without everyone there, even those of us who took different paths after graduation. The event will be held at the Wellington Estate. You remember the place, I'm sure. You used to do yard work there that one summer. Black tie optional. Bring a guest if you'd like, though I understand that might be complicated for you these days. Looking forward to catching up and seeing what you've made of yourself. All the best, Brad Wellington, CEO, Wellington Industries." Marcus read it twice. Then a third time, his jaw tightening with each pass. The surface was cordial enough, but the barbs were expertly placed. The mention of yard work, the casual cruelty of different paths, the pointed reference to his single status, as if Brad didn't know exactly what had happened to Sarah. Everyone knew. It had been in the papers. "Is it from a friend?" Lily appeared at his elbow, trying to peek at the card. "Sort of. Someone from high school." "Are you going to go?" "No." The word came out harder than he intended, and Lily's face fell. Marcus softened his voice. "It's not important, Lil. Just some old classmates getting together." "Why don't you want to see your old friends?" How could he explain it to a 7-year-old? How could he tell her about Brad Wellington, who'd made his life hell for 4 years? About the daily humiliations, the calculated cruelty, the way Brad could make a crowd laugh at Marcus's expense with nothing more than a well-timed comment? About senior year, when things had gotten so bad that Marcus had seriously considered not graduating at all? "They weren't really my friends, honey." Lily was quiet for a moment, processing this with her characteristic seriousness. "Did they hurt your feelings?" "Yeah, sometimes." "Are you scared of them?" The question hit harder than any of Brad's old insults, Marcus looked down at his daughter, at her earnest face and the crayon still clutched in her small hand, and felt something shift in his chest. "No," he lied. "I'm not scared." "Then you should go." She said it with the simple certainty of childhood. Mrs. Rodriguez says we shouldn't hide from things that scare us. We should be brave. Mrs. Rodriguez was Lily's teacher, a force of nature who'd taken Lily under her wing when she'd started first grade. She was always sending home notes about Lily's progress, her potential, her brightness. She believed in Lily in a way that made Marcus's throat tight with gratitude. "Mrs. Rodriguez is very wise," Marcus said carefully. "But this is different." "How?" He didn't have an answer for that. That night, after Lily was asleep, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with a beer he wasn't drinking, and the invitation spread in front of him. He should throw it away. That was the smart thing, the safe thing. Brad Wellington had no power over him anymore. They were adults now, living separate lives in separate worlds, except they weren't separate, were they? Brad was CEO of his family's company, living in the house he'd grown up in, married to his high school sweetheart who'd been homecoming queen. Marcus was working 60-hour weeks to afford a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood where the sirens kept Lily awake at night. The past wasn't past. It was present in every way that mattered. His phone buzzed, a text from his friend and coworker, James. "Saw you got mail from Brad Wellington. Word travels fast in this town." "You going?" Marcus stared at the message. "How did you know?" "His assistant called Morrison's looking for your address. Don said you still worked here." "Sorry, man. Didn't realize it was supposed to be secret." "Of course." Brad couldn't just look him up quietly. He had to make sure everyone knew he was tracking down his old victim, extending his magnanimous invitation to the guy who'd fallen so far. Marcus's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on, "Not going." Good. Guy's a dick. Always was. James had gone to public school, but he'd heard the stories. Everyone had. Marcus's humiliation hadn't been private. Brad had made sure of that. But as Marcus set down his phone and looked at the invitation again, something nagged at him. Lily's question, mainly, "Are you scared of them?" He was. That was the truth he didn't want to admit. 10 years later, the thought of facing Brad Wellington still made his stomach churn with the same sick dread he'd felt walking into Westridge's cafeteria every day, never knowing what fresh hell awaited him. Senior year had been the worst. His mother had just died. Cancer, fast and merciless. And Marcus had been barely holding it together. Brad had seen the weakness and circled like a shark. The memory of it still made him flush with shame. The day Brad had announced Marcus's mother's death to the entire lunchroom, voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Everyone, let's have a moment of silence for Marcus Chen's mom. Oh wait, we should probably tell him we're sorry his meal ticket died. How are you going to afford to stay at Westridge now, Chen? Maybe they'll let you pay tuition by mopping floors." The laughter had been deafening. Marcus had punched him. Just once, a wild swing that connected with Brad's perfect nose and sent him stumbling backward into a table. It had felt good for exactly 2 seconds before the principal was pulling Marcus away and Brad was on the ground, blood streaming from his nose, smiling like he'd won the lottery. Marcus had been suspended. Brad's father had threatened legal action. Only the intervention of one sympathetic teacher, Mrs. Patterson, who'd known Marcus's mother, had kept him from being expelled. He'd finished the year in a haze of grief and humiliation, graduated by the skin of his teeth, and sworn he'd never look back. And he hadn't. Until now. The next morning, Marcus woke to find Lily already dressed and eating cereal at the kitchen table, the reunion invitation in front of her. "You took this out of the trash?" he asked, surprised. "You shouldn't hide from your past," she said solemnly, milk dribbling down her chin. "That's what Mrs. Rodriguez says." "Lily, are you ashamed of me?" The question came out of nowhere, stopping him cold. "What? No, why would you?" "Because you don't want to bring me to your school party. I heard you say you couldn't bring a guest because it was complicated." She made air quotes, a gesture she'd picked up from her teacher. "Is it because I don't have a mom?" Marcus's heart cracked clean through. He sat down heavily in the chair across from her, reaching for her hand. "Lily, listen to me. I am not ashamed of you. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. The only thing I'm proud of in this whole world. Then why won't you go to the party? Because, he struggled for words. Because the people there weren't very nice to me, and I don't want to see them. Were they bullies? The directness of it startled him. Yeah, some of them were. Lily nodded sagely. Tommy Chen bullies me at school. He says my clothes are from the donation box. Marcus felt rage flash hot and immediate. What? You never told me. Mrs. Rodriguez talked to him. She said sometimes people are mean because they're unhappy inside. Lily took another bite of cereal, remarkably calm for someone who just revealed she was being bullied. I don't let it bother me. I know my daddy works hard for everything we have. Marcus's eyes stung. 7 years old, and she was already defending him, protecting his feelings. It wasn't supposed to work like that. You're right, he said quietly. I do work hard, and you should never feel bad about that. I don't. But I think maybe you should go to the party to show the bullies you're not scared anymore. I don't need to prove anything to them. Not for them, Lily said patiently. For you. Out of the mouths of babes. That afternoon, Marcus called in a favor with his manager and left work early. He drove to Riverside, to the nice part of town where the trees were old and the houses were older and money whispered instead of shouted. The Wellington estate sat behind iron gates, sprawling and pristine. Marcus had only been inside once that summer between junior and senior year when he'd worked on the grounds crew. It had been humiliating work, made worse by the fact that Brad was home for the summer, constantly finding excuses to come outside and offer helpful suggestions about Marcus's hedge trimming technique. He parked across the street and sat there, engine idling, looking at the house where Brad Wellington had everything Marcus didn't: legacy, security, a future that had been guaranteed since birth. His phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Marcus Chen? The voice was female, professional, unfamiliar. Yes? This is Jessica Hartwell. I'm calling from the Westridge Academy Alumni Association. Brad Wellington asked me to personally follow up regarding the reunion. We haven't received your RSVP yet. Marcus closed his eyes. Of course, Brad had sent a personal follow-up. I'm not sure I can make it. Oh, that would be such a shame. Brad was very specific that he wanted you there. He said you two were close in school. Close. That was one word for it. I'll think about it, Marcus said. The RSVP deadline is this Friday. We're expecting quite a turnout, over 100 alumni. It's going to be quite the event. Brad's really outdone himself. Of course he had. Brad Wellington didn't do anything halfway. After he hung up, Marcus sat in his car for a long time, watching the sunset behind the Wellington estate, painting the windows gold. Inside that house, Brad was probably planning his triumph, choreographing Marcus's humiliation down to the last detail. And Marcus was going to walk right into it. Because Lily was right. He couldn't keep hiding, not from Brad, not from the past, not from the scared 18-year-old he'd been who'd let himself be broken. He picked up his phone and called James. I need a favor, Marcus said. A big one. Name it. I need to borrow your suit, the nice one you wore to your sister's wedding. There was a pause. You're going to that reunion? Yeah. Marcus, I know it's stupid. I know I'm probably walking into a trap, but I can't. His voice cracked. I can't let my daughter think I'm scared. She's being bullied at school and she's handling it with more grace than I ever did. And I need to show her that you don't run from people like that. Okay, James said quietly. You can borrow the suit, but Marcus? Yeah? Don't go alone. Bring someone with you, someone in your corner. I don't exactly have anyone to bring. Then I'll go with you. Marcus's throat tightened. You don't have to. Yes, I do. You're my friend, and I'm not letting you walk into the lion's den by yourself. That Friday, Marcus sent his RSVP. Attending, +1. He didn't tell Lily yet. There was still time to back out, to come to his senses, to remember that revenge fantasies didn't work in real life. People like Brad Wellington always won. But when he got home from work that night, Lily was waiting at the door with a drawing. She'd made him a superhero, cape, mask, the works. Underneath, In her careful printing, "My brave daddy." Marcus taped it to the refrigerator and knew he was committed. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of work and preparation. James insisted on taking him shopping for a new shirt. "You can't wear my suit with a shirt that has grease stains, man." And they found a decent one on clearance. Marcus spent an evening teaching himself how to tie a proper bow tie using YouTube tutorials, Lily offering color commentary from the couch. "You look fancy, Daddy." "I look ridiculous." "Fancy ridiculous," she amended, and he couldn't help but laugh. He didn't hear from Brad directly, but the reminders kept coming. A text from the Alumni Association with the evening schedule, an email with directions and parking information, a group message to all attendees about the photographer who'd be there to document the evening. Of course there'd be a photographer. Brad would want evidence. The night before the reunion, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of the city. Sirens, music from a passing car, the couple upstairs having another fight. What was he doing? What did he possibly hope to accomplish by showing up? Brad would take one look at him. Marcus Chen, auto mechanic, single father, living in a 2-bedroom apartment that smelled like mildew, and know he'd won. Know that all the cruelty, all the humiliation had been justified because look how Marcus had turned out. His phone lit up. A text from a number he didn't recognize. "Good luck tomorrow. You've got this." He stared at it, confused, until a second message followed. "It's Mrs. Patterson. Lily's teacher gave me your number. She told me about the reunion. I want you to know I'm proud of you for going, and I'm sorry I couldn't do more to protect you back then." Marcus's vision blurred. Mrs. Patterson. She'd been the only teacher at Westridge who'd treated him like he mattered, who'd fought for him when everyone else wanted to expel him for hitting Brad. She'd retired years ago, moved away, and he'd lost touch. "Thank you," he typed back. "That means everything. You were always stronger than you knew. Don't let them make you forget that." He read the message 3 times, then set his phone aside, and finally fell asleep. The day of the reunion dawned cold and clear. Marcus called in sick to work, the first time he'd done so in 2 years, and spent the morning with Lily. They went to the park, fed the ducks, got ice cream. Normal things. Grounding things. "Are you nervous about tonight?" Lily asked, chocolate ice cream smeared across her face. "Yeah," Marcus admitted. "Pretty nervous." "Will there be dancing?" "Probably." "You should dance with your friend. That would be fun." Marcus smiled despite himself. "Maybe. And if the bullies are mean, you should just ignore them. That's what I do with Tommy." "Has he been bothering you again?" Lily shook her head. "Mrs. Rodriguez made him apologize, and now he shares his snacks with me sometimes. I think he was just sad because his parents are getting divorced." Marcus pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "You're a good kid, you know that?" "I learned from the best." That evening, James arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, looking uncomfortable in his good suit. Marcus was already dressed, having spent the last hour adjusting his tie, then his collar, then his tie again. "You look good, man," James said. "Professional." "I look like I'm playing dress-up." "No, you don't. You look like you belong." James hesitated. "Listen, if this gets ugly, it will. Then we leave. No shame in that. You showed up, you proved your point, and we bounce." Marcus nodded, grateful for the exit strategy even as he knew he wouldn't take it. He'd come this far. He'd see it through. Mrs. Rodriguez, Lily's teacher, arrived to babysit. She gave Marcus a fierce hug and whispered, "Make us proud," in his ear. Lily made him promise to tell her everything in the morning, especially the part about the fancy food. The drive to Riverside took 20 minutes but felt like hours. James tried to make conversation, talking about work, about a game he'd watched, about anything but where they were headed. But Marcus barely heard him. His mind was elsewhere, replaying every humiliation, every cruel joke, every moment of helplessness. The Wellington estate was lit up like Christmas, every window blazing with warm light. Cars lined the circular driveway. Mercedes, BMWs, Teslas. The kinds of cars Marcus repaired but would never own. "Last chance to bail," James said quietly as they pulled up to the valet stand. Marcus looked at the house, at the people in designer clothes laughing on the veranda, at the life he'd never been part of, and never would be. He thought about Lily's drawing on his refrigerator. My brave daddy. Let's go, he said, and opened the door. The valet looked at James's 10-year-old Honda Civic like it was a curiosity, something that had wandered into the wrong neighborhood. Marcus tipped him $5, probably not enough, but it was what he had, and followed James up the stone steps to the entrance. The foyer was exactly as he remembered it. Marble floors, crystal chandelier, a staircase that curved up to the second floor like something out of a movie. A woman in a black dress stood behind a check-in table holding a tablet. Names, please? Marcus Chen. She scanned her list, then looked up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Welcome back, Marcus. It's been a while. He didn't recognize her, which meant she probably recognized him. Probably knew all about him, about what he'd become. Small towns were like that. And your guest? James Morrison. She made note of it, then gestured toward the ballroom. Everyone's gathering in there. There's a coat check to your left, open bar, and appetizers are being passed. Dinner will be served at 8. The ballroom was packed, at least 100 people, maybe more, all dressed to kill and clutching drinks. A jazz trio played in the corner. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that probably cost more than Marcus made in a week. And there, holding court in the center of the room, was Brad Wellington. He hadn't changed much. Still tall, still handsome in that clean-cut country club way. His suit probably cost more than Marcus's car. He was laughing at something, head thrown back, surrounded by a cluster of people Marcus vaguely recognized from high school. Brad's eyes found Marcus across the room, and his smile widened. Marcus Chen. His voice carried over the music, over the chatter. People turned to look. I can't believe you actually came. The room seemed to hold its breath. This was it. The moment Brad had been orchestrating for weeks. The public reunion, the opportunity to remind Marcus of exactly where they stood in the social hierarchy. Marcus felt James tense beside him, ready to defend, ready to leave. But Marcus didn't move. He met Brad's eyes across the crowded room and remembered Mrs. Patterson's text. You were always stronger than you knew. Wouldn't miss it, Marcus said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. Brad was already moving toward them, the crowd parting like water. Up close, Marcus could see the expensive watch, the perfect hair, the self-satisfied glow of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. Let me get a look at you, Brad said, making a show of looking Marcus up and down. 10 years. Wow, you look exactly the same. The barb was subtle but effective. Around them, people smirked. You too, Marcus said evenly. Still living at home, I see. It wasn't much, but it landed. Brad's smile tightened just a fraction. Family estate, Brad corrected. Someone has to run the place. And what about you? Still in town? Yeah. What are you doing these days? I heard you were working at Morrison's auto repair. He said it like it was quaint, like Marcus was playing mechanic as a hobby. I am. How interesting. So you fix cars now? Brad turned to his audience, ensuring everyone was listening. You know, Marcus was going to be an engineer. He had that full scholarship to state. What happened with that? Everyone knew what happened. Brad knew what happened. But he wanted to hear Marcus say it, wanted to watch him squirm. Life happened, Marcus said quietly. Right. Your mom died, and then... What was it? Your girlfriend got pregnant? Brad snapped his fingers like he was trying to remember, even though Marcus knew he remembered every detail. Sarah, wasn't it? And then she... That's enough, James said, stepping forward. Brad held up his hands in mock surrender. Hey, I'm just trying to catch up with an old friend. No offense meant, Marcus. I think it's great that you're making the best of your situation. Single dad, blue-collar work. There's no shame in that. The words dripped with condescension. Around them, the crowd watched with the gleeful anticipation of spectators at a blood sport. This was what Brad had wanted, this moment, this humiliation. And Marcus had walked right into it. But before he could respond, before he could tell Brad exactly what he thought of him and this whole charade, the room went silent. Not the expectant silence of before, but something else, something shocked. Everyone was looking toward the entrance. Marcus turned, and his entire world stopped. Standing in the doorway of the Wellington Estate ballroom, backlit by the chandelier in the foyer, was a woman who commanded attention without asking for it. She was tall, maybe 5'9" in heels, wearing a black evening gown that was elegant without being ostentatious. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple chignon, and she wore minimal jewelry, just a pair of diamond studs that caught the light when she moved. But it wasn't her appearance that silenced the room. It was the way she carried herself, the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was and didn't need to prove it to anyone. Marcus's breath caught in his chest. He knew her. Her eyes scanned the crowd with cool assessment before landing on him, and something in her expression softened. She moved forward with purpose, her heels clicking against the marble floor, and the crowd parted instinctively to let her through. "I'm sorry I'm late," she said, reaching Marcus's side and placing a hand on his arm with easy familiarity. Her voice was warm, cultured, with the faintest hint of an accent he couldn't quite place. "Traffic was terrible." Marcus stared at her, unable to form words. This couldn't be happening. This was impossible. Brad recovered first, his salesman's smile snapping back into place, even as confusion flickered in his eyes. "And you are?" The woman turned to face him, and Marcus saw Brad actually take a step back. There was something in her gaze that he recognized, the look of someone who'd built empires and crushed competitors before breakfast. "Catherine Harlow," she said, extending her hand. "You must be Brad Wellington. Marcus has told me about you." Brad shook her hand automatically, his expression cycling through confusion, curiosity, and something that looked almost like concern. Around them, Marcus could hear the whispers starting, phones being pulled from purses and pockets. "Catherine Harlow," someone breathed. "Oh my God, that's Catherine Harlow." "Wait, the Catherine Harlow? From Harlow Technologies?" "She's on the Forbes list. I read an article about her last month." Brad's face was doing something complicated. "I'm sorry, I don't think I understand." "How do you know Marcus?" Catherine's smile was mysterious, almost playful. "We've known each other for years. When Marcus mentioned he was attending his reunion tonight, I insisted on coming along. I hope that's not a problem." "No, of course not. We're just surprised. Marcus didn't mention—" Brad trailed off, looking at Marcus with barely concealed confusion and something that might have been envy. "How exactly do you two know each other?" Before Marcus could find his voice, his brain was still trying to process the fact that Catherine Harlow, billionaire CEO Catherine Harlow, was standing in the Wellington estate claiming to be his guest. She squeezed his arm gently. "That's quite a story, actually," Catherine said. "Though perhaps not one for a crowd. Marcus is rather private about his good deeds." Good deeds. The words triggered something in Marcus's memory, a flash of snow and headlights, and a night he'd tried very hard to forget. "Catherine," he managed, his voice rough, "what are you doing here?" She looked at him, and her eyes were kind. "Where I should have been years ago, supporting a friend." James, who'd been standing frozen beside Marcus this whole time, made a sound that might have been a strangled laugh or a cough. Brad was staring at them like they'd started speaking a foreign language. "I think," Catherine said, addressing the room at large but keeping her hand firmly on Marcus's arm, "that I could use a drink. Marcus, would you join me at the bar?" It wasn't really a question. She was giving him an out, a chance to escape the spotlight that had suddenly become very complicated. Marcus nodded mutely and let her guide him away from Brad, from the whispering crowd, from the whole surreal situation. James followed like a faithful guard dog, still looking like he'd been hit over the head with a 2x4. At the bar, Catherine ordered a vodka martini with the ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Marcus asked for water, not trusting himself with alcohol right now. James got a whiskey and downed half of it in one gulp. "Okay," James said, setting his glass down with a thunk. "Someone want to tell me what the hell just happened? Because I'm pretty sure I just watched Catherine Harlow, actual billionaire Catherine Harlow, walk into this party and claim to be Marcus's date." "She's not my date," Marcus said automatically, then looked at Catherine. "Are you?" Catherine's lips quirked. "If that's all right with you." "I don't understand. How did you even know I was going to be here?" "You called my office last week. You were trying to reach me about a potential job opening." She paused, reading his expression. "You don't remember, do you?" Marcus's mind raced. Last week, he'd made a dozen calls, sending out resumes, trying to find something better than Morrison's, something with benefits and maybe a path forward. He'd called so many places the numbers blurred together. I might have called, he admitted, but I definitely didn't get through to you. I talked to a receptionist who said she'd pass along my information. She did. And when I saw your name, I remembered. Catherine's expression grew serious. Marcus Chen, 5 years ago. Route 40, during that blizzard. The memory hit him like a physical blow. 5 years ago. Lily had been 2, still in diapers, crying in her car seat as Marcus drove through the worst snowstorm he'd ever seen. He'd been coming back from a job interview in the city, another rejection, another door closed, and the roads had been treacherous. He should have pulled over, should have waited it out, but he'd had to get back to the babysitter, had to relieve Mrs. Rodriguez, who was watching Lily for free because Marcus couldn't afford to pay her. He'd seen the car in the ditch almost too late, black ice and snow making it nearly invisible. A Mercedes, expensive and crumpled, steam rising from the hood. He'd driven past it at first. Not my problem, can't afford to get involved. But then he'd thought about his mother, about how she'd raised him to help people even when it was hard. He'd pulled over, trudged through knee-deep snow to the wreck, found a woman in the driver's seat, conscious but dazed, blood running down her face from a gash on her forehead. I remember, Marcus said quietly. You were hurt. The car was totaled. I'd swerved to miss a deer, Catherine said. Hit a patch of ice, spun out, ended up in that ditch. My phone was dead. The heater had stopped working. It was 20 degrees out and getting colder. She took a sip of her martini. I thought I was going to die there. You called 911 on my phone. I stayed until the ambulance came. You did more than that. You gave me your jacket, your only jacket, because I was shivering. You kept me talking, kept me conscious. You told me about your daughter, about how much you loved her, about how you were fighting to give her a good life. And when the ambulance arrived, you left before I could even get your name. Marcus remembered that part too. He'd been embarrassed, ashamed of his beat-up car and his cheap coat, and the fact that he had a screaming toddler in the back seat. He'd wanted to help, but he hadn't wanted her pity. I tried to find you afterward, Catherine continued. I called the police, the hospital, everyone I could think of, but you'd given them a fake name. John Smith, Marcus said, wincing. Not very creative. No, she agreed with a small smile. But effective. It took me 5 years and a stroke of luck, you calling my office, to track you down. James was staring at Marcus like he'd grown a second head. You saved Catherine Harlow's life and never told anyone? I didn't know who she was. And I didn't save her life. I just stayed with her until help came. You absolutely saved my life, Catherine said firmly. The doctor said another hour in those conditions, and I would have died from hypothermia or the head injury. You stopped. In the middle of a blizzard, with a baby in your car, you stopped to help a stranger. Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't. 37 cars passed before you stopped. I counted. Catherine's voice was matter-of-fact, but there was steel beneath it. 37 people saw me and kept driving. You were the one who helped. Marcus didn't know what to say. The memory of that night was tangled up with so much else. The rejection from the interview, the desperation of his situation, the way Lily had cried the whole drive home because she was hungry and he'd forgotten to pack enough snacks. He'd helped because his mother had raised him to help, not because he expected anything in return. So when I saw your name on a job application, Catherine continued, I had to find out if it was really you. I called your references, talked to your manager at Morrison's. He spoke very highly of you, reliable, honest, hard worker. And then I did some research on my own. Research? Marcus's stomach tightened. Public records, mostly. I learned about Sarah, about the accident. I'm sorry for your loss. The words were simple, but they hit harder than Brad's calculated cruelty. Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. I also learned that you've been raising your daughter alone, working multiple jobs, never asking for help. And I thought about that night, about what you told me. You said you were fighting to give her a good life, so I wanted to know, are you still fighting? Every day. Good. Catherine set down her empty martini glass. Because I'd like to offer you a position at my company. The ballroom seemed to tilt. What? I need someone to run our new automotive division, someone who understands cars from the ground up, who can talk to both mechanics and engineers, someone I can trust. She met his eyes. I think you're that person. Marcus's mind was reeling. I'm a mechanic. I don't have a degree. You have experience, integrity, and work ethic. The rest can be learned. Catherine pulled a business card from her clutch and pressed it into his hand. Think about it. No pressure, but the offer stands. This is insane, Marcus whispered. Is it? You saved my life, Marcus. 5 years ago, I was at my lowest point. My company was failing, my marriage had just ended, and I was driving too fast on icy roads because I wasn't paying attention. I wanted to disappear. She paused, and for a moment the polished CEO facade cracked, revealing something raw beneath. You didn't just save my life that night. You reminded me why it was worth saving. You told me about Lily, about how every day was hard, but you kept going because she needed you. That story stayed with me. It helped me rebuild. I didn't know, Marcus said helplessly. How could you? But I knew, and I've been looking for a way to thank you ever since. Catherine glanced over his shoulder and her expression hardened slightly. And when you mentioned this reunion, when you talked about Brad Wellington and what he put you through, I thought it was time to make myself useful. Marcus followed her gaze. Brad was watching them from across the room, surrounded by his usual entourage, but clearly distracted. He kept glancing over, trying to figure out what was happening, why Catherine Harlow was here with Marcus Chen of all people. You came here to make a point, Marcus realized. I came here to support a friend, Catherine corrected. The point is just a bonus. James laughed, a sound of pure disbelief and delight. I like her. Can we keep her? Before Marcus could respond, a woman he vaguely recognized from high school approached their group. Chelsea. Something she'd been in his chemistry class. She'd ignored him then, wouldn't have known his name if it was tattooed on his forehead. Marcus Chen, she said, voice bright with forced enthusiasm. Oh my gosh, I almost didn't recognize you. How have you been? Fine, Marcus said warily. That's so great. And you brought a friend. She was looking at Catherine with barely disguised curiosity and a hint of calculation that made Marcus's skin crawl. I don't think we've met. I'm Chelsea Winters. Catherine Harlow. Chelsea's eyes went wide. The Catherine Harlow? Oh, wow. How do you two know each other? We're colleagues, Catherine said smoothly. Really? I heard Marcus was working at an auto shop. He is. At my company's automotive division. Catherine delivered the lie without blinking. He's been instrumental in our expansion into the aftermarket sector. Marcus tried not to choke on his water. Catherine was making this up on the spot, spinning a narrative that transformed his job at Morrison's into something corporate and impressive. Chelsea looked suitably impressed and confused. That's amazing. I had no idea you were working for Harlow Technologies, Marcus. It's a recent development, Catherine interjected before Marcus could correct her. We're still finalizing the details. Very hush-hush. Of course, of course. Chelsea was practically vibrating with the desire to spread this gossip. Well, it was so good to see you, Marcus. We should catch up later. She scurried off, already pulling out her phone. Marcus watched her go, then turned to Catherine. You just lied to her. I simplified the timeline, Catherine corrected. You will be working for Harlow Technologies, as of tonight, if you'll accept the position. You're offering me a job based on something that happened 5 years ago. I'm offering you a job based on your character, your work ethic, and your potential. The fact that you saved my life is just how I know you have those qualities. Catherine signaled the bartender for another martini. Besides, do you really want to keep working at Morrison's? No, Marcus admitted. But this feels like charity. It's not. I don't do charity. This is business. I need someone I can trust running a new division, and you fit the bill. If you want to prove yourself, fine. I'll give you a probationary period, but I think we both know you'll exceed expectations. James clapped Marcus on the shoulder. Man, I don't know what kind of karma you've been building up, but tonight it just came due. Take the job. Marcus looked down at the business card in his hand. Catherine Harlow, CEO, Harlow Technologies. A phone number. An email address. An escape route from the endless grind of barely making ends meet. I have Lily to think about, he said slowly. I can't just upend her life on a whim. The position comes with full benefits, including health insurance and childcare assistance. The salary is competitive and there's room for advancement. You'd be able to move to a better neighborhood, put money away for her education. Catherine's voice softened. You'd be able to give her the life you've been fighting for. It was too much, too good. There had to be a catch. Why are you really doing this? Marcus asked. Catherine was quiet for a moment, swirling her fresh martini. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful, almost vulnerable. 5 years ago, I was ready to give up. My company was hemorrhaging money, my ex-husband was dragging me through a vicious divorce, and I felt like I'd failed at everything that mattered. That night, driving through that storm, I wasn't being careful because I didn't particularly care what happened to me. She took a sip of her drink. And then I ended up in that ditch, bleeding and cold and scared. And you appeared. This stranger with a crying baby and an old coat, and you stayed with me. You could have just called 911 and left, but you stayed. You talked to me, kept me conscious, gave me your jacket even though you were shivering. And you told me about Lily, about being her father, about how hard it was, but how worth it. Catherine's eyes met his, and Marcus saw the shimmer of tears she was too proud to shed. You reminded me that there were still good people in the world, that kindness still existed. And when you left, I decided that if you could keep fighting for your daughter, I could keep fighting for my company. You saved my life in more ways than one, Marcus Chen. So yes, I'm offering you this job because I owe you, but I'm also offering it because I genuinely believe you'll be excellent at it. Consider it payment of a debt and a sound business decision. Marcus didn't know what to say. This woman, this powerful, successful woman, was telling him that he'd changed her life without even knowing it. The idea was overwhelming. I need to think about it, he finally said. Of course, take your time. Catherine glanced at the crowd, which was still buzzing with speculation and sideways glances. In the meantime, shall we circulate? I believe we're making quite the impression. They were. Marcus could feel the weight of every eye in the room tracking their movement. The whispers followed them like a wake. That's Marcus Chen. He works at an auto shop. What's he doing with Catherine Harlow? Did you hear what Chelsea said? Apparently he works for her company. No way. Yes way. It was surreal. An hour ago, he'd been bracing himself for public humiliation. Now he was walking through the party with one of the most successful businesswomen in the country on his arm, and people were looking at him with something other than pity or contempt. They were looking at him with confusion, curiosity, and was that respect? Brad intercepted them near the appetizer table, his smile tight and his eyes calculating. Catherine, I have to say, this is quite a surprise. When Marcus said he was bringing a guest, I certainly didn't expect. He gestured vaguely, at a loss for words. Expect what? Catherine's tone was pleasant, but there was an edge to it. Well, you know, someone of your caliber. Are you suggesting Marcus doesn't have friends of caliber? Brad backpedaled, his salesman's charm kicking into overdrive. No, of course not. I just meant, it's wonderful to see him doing so well. We were just catching up earlier about his work at Morrison's Auto Repair. Yes, he mentioned you brought that up, Catherine said coolly. I hope you didn't give him too hard a time about it. Some of the best engineers I know started in auto shops. There's value in understanding how things work from the ground up. Brad's smile was looking increasingly strained. Absolutely. I have the utmost respect for blue-collar workers. The condescension in his voice was barely masked, and Catherine's expression went glacial. My father was a plumber, she said conversationally. Worked with his hands his whole life, never went to college. He built his business from nothing and put 3 kids through school on his salary. I learned everything I know about work ethic from watching him come home exhausted every night and still find time to help us with our homework. She paused, letting that sink in. So when you say blue collar in that tone, I take it personally. Brad looked like he'd been slapped. Around them, people had stopped pretending not to listen. James was grinning into his whiskey. I didn't mean any offense, Brad managed. I'm sure you didn't. Catherine's smile could have frozen fire. Now, if you'll excuse us, I believe dinner is about to be served. She guided Marcus away, leaving Brad standing alone by the appetizer table, his face an interesting shade of red. Marcus could hear the whispers intensifying, phones being pulled out to Google Catherine Harlow's background, to fact-check her father's profession, to spread this latest development. "That was incredible," James whispered as they found their assigned seats. "Did you see his face?" Marcus had seen it. He'd also seen something else in Brad's expression, a flicker of genuine uncertainty. Brad Wellington was used to being the most important person in any room. Having someone like Catherine shut him down publicly was clearly not part of his plan for the evening. Dinner was announced, and the crowd moved toward their tables. Marcus found his name card at a table near the back. Of course, Brad had seated him in the cheap seats, but Catherine simply picked up both their cards and moved them to a table at the front, displacing two people Marcus didn't recognize. "You can do that?" he asked. "I just did." She sat down with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in her life. "Besides, I want to be where I can see everything." The meal was elegant and excessive, multiple courses, expensive wine, the kind of food that was more art than sustenance. Marcus ate mechanically, still trying to process everything that was happening. Across the table, James was chatting with a woman who'd apparently gone to Westridge a few years after them, and they were bonding over shared memories of particular teachers. Catherine leaned close to Marcus. "You're being very quiet." "I'm trying to figure out if this is real or if I'm having a very elaborate dream." "It's real, though I understand the feeling. Most of my life feels like a dream these days." She paused. "Not always a good one." "What do you mean?" Catherine considered her wine glass. "Success is isolating. Everyone wants something from you. Every interaction is calculated, transactional. People see the Forbes list and the company valuation, and they forget there's a person underneath." She looked at him. "That's why that night mattered so much to me. You had no idea who I was. You helped because it was the right thing to do, not because you expected anything in return." "I really didn't expect this," Marcus said. "I know. That's what makes it genuine." Catherine set down her glass. "Tell me about Lily. How is she?" For the first time that evening, Marcus felt himself relax. Talking about his daughter was easy, natural. He told Catherine about Lily's reading level, her questions, her drawings, her resilience in the face of bullying. He told her about Mrs. Rodriguez and the park and ice cream that afternoon. Catherine listened with genuine interest, asking questions, laughing at the funny parts. It wasn't until Marcus mentioned Lily's question about hiding from the past that Catherine's expression grew serious. "She sounds wise beyond her years." "She is. Too wise, sometimes. I wish she could just be a kid." "She's a kid with an incredible father. That's better than most people get." Marcus's throat tightened. "I'm just doing the best I can." "That's all any of us can do." Halfway through the main course, Brad stood up and clinked his glass for attention. The room gradually quieted. "I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight," Brad said, his voice carrying easily across the ballroom. He'd recovered from his earlier embarrassment, his charm back at full wattage. "It's been 10 years since we graduated from Westridge Academy, and it's amazing to see how far we've all come. Some of us are running companies, some are doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs. We've really made our mark on the world." He was in his element now, commanding the room, basking in the attention. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "I thought it would be fun to go around and have people share what they've been up to. Just a few words, nothing formal. Let's start with..." Brad's eyes landed on Marcus with predatory precision. "Marcus Chen, why don't you kick us off?" The room went silent. Every eye turned toward Marcus. This was it, the moment Brad had been building toward. The public confession of failure, the admission that Marcus Chen had amounted to nothing. Marcus started to stand, his mind blank with panic, but Catherine's hand on his arm stopped him. She rose to her feet instead, calm and unhurried. Every head in the room swiveled toward her. "Actually," Catherine said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom, "I'd like to say something first. If that's all right?" Brad looked thrown. "I'm not sure that's..." "It won't take long." Catherine's smile was pleasant, but her tone made it clear she wasn't asking permission. "I want to tell you all about the night I met Marcus Chen." The ballroom was so quiet that Marcus could hear the ice settling in someone's water glass 3 tables away. Catherine stood perfectly still, composed and commanding, her hand still resting lightly on Marcus's shoulder. He could feel the tension radiating through the room, the collective held breath of 100 people waiting to see what would happen next. Brad's expression had frozen somewhere between confusion and alarm. He'd lost control of his carefully orchestrated evening, and he knew it. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "I'm not sure this is the appropriate time for— It won't take long," Catherine repeated, her voice pleasant but immovable as steel. She turned to address the room at large, making eye contact with people at different tables, drawing them in. 5 years ago, I was driving through the worst blizzard I'd ever seen. I was coming back from a business meeting that had gone badly. My company was failing, my personal life was in shambles, and I wasn't paying attention to the road the way I should have been. Marcus watched her, stunned. He'd assumed she would mention their connection in vague terms, maybe hint at his character without going into specifics. But Catherine was telling the whole story, laying it bare for everyone to hear. "I hit a patch of black ice and lost control of my car," Catherine continued. "I spun out and ended up in a ditch on Route 40. My phone was dead, the heater had stopped working. It was 20 degrees outside and getting colder by the minute. I had a head injury that was bleeding badly, and I was starting to lose consciousness." She paused, letting the image sink in. Around the room, people were leaning forward, caught up in the narrative despite themselves. Even Brad seemed momentarily transfixed. 37 cars passed me before anyone stopped," Catherine said quietly. "I counted them. 37 people saw a wrecked car in a ditch during a blizzard and kept driving. Maybe they were scared. Maybe they didn't want to get involved. Maybe they were in a hurry to get home to their families. Whatever the reason, they all kept going." Marcus felt James shift beside him, and when he glanced over, his friend's eyes were bright with understanding and something that might have been pride. "The 38th car stopped," Catherine continued. "It was old, probably held together with duct tape and prayers. The driver was a young man with a 2-year-old in the back seat. The baby was crying. He looked exhausted, and he had every reason to keep driving. He was clearly struggling himself, had his own problems to deal with. But he stopped." She looked down at Marcus then, and her smile was genuine and warm. "That man was Marcus Chen. He trudged through knee-deep snow to check on me. When he saw I was hurt, he called 911 on his own phone. Then he gave me his jacket, his only jacket, in the middle of a blizzard, because I was shivering. He stayed with me for 45 minutes in freezing temperatures with his daughter crying in his car, keeping me conscious, keeping me talking, until the ambulance arrived." Catherine's voice had grown softer, more intimate, but it still carried clearly through the silent ballroom. "The paramedics told me later that another hour in those conditions and I would have died. Either the head injury would have done it, or hypothermia. Marcus Chen saved my life that night." There was a collective intake of breath around the room. People were looking at Marcus now with frank reassessment, seeing him differently. Brad's face had gone pale. "Before the ambulance took me away, I asked Marcus his name. He told me John Smith." Catherine's lips quirked. "I knew it was fake, but I didn't push. I was grateful just to be alive. But I tried to find him afterward. I called the police, the hospitals, anyone I could think of. I wanted to thank him properly, to repay him somehow for what he'd done. But he'd disappeared." She picked up her wine glass and took a small sip, letting the tension build. "It took me 5 years to find him. 5 years of searching, of hoping that someday I'd get the chance to tell him what that night meant to me. Not just because he saved my life, though he did, but because of what he told me while we waited for help." Marcus's heart was pounding. He didn't remember telling her much, just small talk to keep her conscious, random details about his life to keep her focused. "Marcus told me about his daughter," Catherine said, "about how hard things were, how he was working multiple jobs, how he was barely keeping his head above water. But he also told me that she was worth it, that every hard day, every struggle, every moment of doubt was worth it because he was her father and she needed him. He talked about her with such love, such fierce devotion." Catherine's voice wavered slightly, and Marcus realized with shock that she was fighting back emotion. "I was at my lowest point that night. I'd been thinking that maybe it was time to give up, to let the company fail, to stop fighting. But listening to Marcus talk about his daughter, about choosing to keep going even when everything was hard, it changed something in me. If this stranger could find the strength to keep fighting for what mattered to him, then maybe I could too." She set down her glass and straightened her shoulders. "After that night, I rebuilt my company from the ground up. I made hard decisions, took risks, refused to quit even when it seemed hopeless. And every time I wanted to give up, I thought about Marcus Chen and his daughter. I thought about the kind of man who stops to help a stranger in a blizzard, even when he's barely surviving himself. That's the standard I held myself to. The room was completely silent. Brad looked like he'd been turned to stone. So when Marcus Chen called my office last week inquiring about a job opening, I knew exactly who he was, and I knew I had to be here tonight. Catherine's gaze swept across the room, landing briefly on Brad before returning to the crowd. Because I wanted all of you to know something about the man you went to school with. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was clear and strong. Marcus Chen is the reason Harlow Technologies is successful today. Not because he works for me, though as of tonight, he will be running our new automotive division, but because his character, his kindness, his refusal to look away from someone in need even when it cost him, that's the foundation I built my company on. That's the example I aspire to. Catherine looked down at Marcus, and her smile was fierce with pride. So when someone asks what Marcus has been doing for the past 10 years, the answer is simple. He's been being a good man, a good father, the kind of person who makes the world better just by being in it. And now, if he'll accept the position, he's going to help me build something extraordinary. She sat down, and for a moment, nobody moved. Then someone started clapping. It was James, loud and enthusiastic, with the kind of aggressive support only a true friend could muster. But then others joined in, hesitantly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was applauding. Marcus sat frozen in his chair, overwhelmed. People at nearby tables were looking at him with respect, with curiosity, with something that looked almost like admiration. Chelsea Winters was wiping her eyes. A man Marcus didn't recognize gave him a thumbs up, and Brad Wellington stood at the front of the room, his carefully planned evening in ruins, looking like he'd been punched in the gut. The applause died down gradually, and the murmur of conversation rose to fill the space. But it was different now. People weren't whispering about Marcus's failures anymore. They were talking about the story Catherine had just told, about the car accident, about the job offer, about how wild it was that Marcus Chen had saved Catherine Harlow's life. Brad cleared his throat, trying to regain control. That's quite a story. Very touching. I'm sure we're all happy that Marcus— I'm not finished, Catherine said pleasantly. Brad's jaw clenched. I appreciate your perspective, but I think when I was researching Marcus, Catherine continued, speaking over him with the easy authority of someone used to boardrooms and shareholders, I learned about his time at Westridge Academy, about his mother's death during senior year, about the scholarship he had to give up, about the bullying he endured. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Brad's face went from pale to scarlet. I was particularly interested in the incident that led to Marcus's suspension, Catherine said thoughtfully. The one where he punched another student. Would you like to tell everyone what you said to provoke that punch, Brad? Brad's mouth opened and closed. Around the room, people were shifting uncomfortably, memories stirring. Marcus could see recognition dawning on faces, embarrassment and guilt flickering across features. That was a long time ago, Brad managed. We were kids. Everyone said things they regret in high school. True, Catherine agreed. But some things cross a line. Making fun of someone's recently deceased mother, for instance. Mocking them for their grief. That's not typical teenage thoughtlessness. That's cruelty. The word hung in the air like an accusation. Brad looked around the room, seeking support, but most people were studiously avoiding his gaze. A few were nodding slightly, their expressions thoughtful or ashamed. I apologized for that, Brad said, though Marcus couldn't remember any such apology. We were 17. You can't hold someone accountable for who they were as a teenager. Can I? Catherine's smile was sharp. I think character matters. I think the choices we make define us, whether we're 17 or 70, and I think the way we treat people when they're vulnerable tells us everything we need to know about who we really are. She leaned back in her chair, completely at ease despite the tension crackling through the room. But you're right about one thing, Brad. People change, or they have the opportunity to change. The question is whether they take it. Brad stood there for a long moment, clearly wrestling with how to respond. His whole evening had been designed to put Marcus in his place, to remind everyone, including Marcus, of the social hierarchy that had existed in high school. But Catherine had flipped the script entirely. Now Brad was the one on trial, and he knew it. "I think," Brad said finally, his voice tight, "that we should all just enjoy the evening. Dinner's being served, and we have a wonderful night planned." He sat down abruptly, ending the impromptu speeches. Servers appeared as if on cue, bringing out the next course. Conversation resumed, but it was subdued, thoughtful. People kept glancing over at Marcus's table, then quickly looking away when he noticed. James leaned across the table, grinning like a madman. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed. I want to frame that moment and hang it on my wall." Catherine laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. "I may have gotten a bit carried away." "No," Marcus said quietly. "You were perfect. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, though I do hope you'll accept the job offer. I meant what I said. You'd be excellent at it." Marcus looked at her, at this woman who'd walked into his nightmare of an evening and turned it into something else entirely. A woman who'd remembered him after 5 years, who'd tracked him down, who'd come here tonight to stand beside him when he'd expected to face this alone. "Why did you really come here tonight?" he asked. Catherine considered the question seriously. "Because I don't like bullies. Because I believe in supporting good people. And because I owed you a debt I could never fully repay. But mostly?" She smiled. "Because the look on Brad Wellington's face when I walked in on your arm was worth every minute of the drive." Marcus surprised himself by laughing. It felt good, cathartic, like releasing pressure that had been building for years. The rest of dinner passed in a blur. People approached their table in ones and twos, ostensibly to say hello to Catherine, but really to get a closer look at Marcus, to reassess him, to be seen talking to the man who'd saved Catherine Harlow's life. It was surreal and uncomfortable and oddly gratifying all at once. Sarah Mitchell, who'd been head cheerleader and had never spoken to Marcus except to ask him to move out of her way in the hallway, stopped by to gush about how amazing it was that he'd been so heroic. Marcus accepted her attention with polite detachment, aware that her interest had nothing to do with him and everything to do with his association with Catherine. David Park, who'd actually been friendly to Marcus in high school, offered genuine congratulations and asked about Lily. They talked for a few minutes about fatherhood. David had 2 kids now, and exchanged numbers with promises to stay in touch that might actually be sincere. And through it all, Marcus was aware of Brad watching from his table at the front of the room. Brad's wife, the former homecoming queen whose name Marcus couldn't remember, kept trying to engage him in conversation, but Brad's attention was elsewhere. He was watching Marcus with an expression that cycled between anger, confusion, and something that might have been regret. After dinner, there was dancing. The jazz trio from earlier had been replaced by a DJ, playing a mix of current hits and songs from their high school years. Catherine excused herself to take a phone call. "Business never sleeps," she said apologetically. And James was pulled onto the dance floor by the woman he'd been talking to earlier. Marcus found himself alone at the table, nursing a glass of wine he hadn't touched, watching his former classmates dance and laugh and pretend the earlier tension hadn't happened. "Marcus!" He looked up to find Brad standing beside him, hands in his pockets, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Up close, Marcus could see lines around his eyes that hadn't been there in high school, a tightness to his mouth that suggested stress or unhappiness or both. "Brad," Marcus said neutrally, "can we talk? Outside, maybe." Marcus considered refusing. He'd faced his fear, proved his point, shown up when everyone expected him to hide. He didn't owe Brad Wellington a private conversation, but curiosity won out. He wanted to know what Brad could possibly have to say after tonight's disaster. "Sure." They walked out to the veranda in silence. The night air was cool and clear, a relief after the stuffy warmth of the ballroom. From inside, they could hear music and laughter, the sounds of a party in full swing. Brad leaned against the railing, staring out at the manicured gardens. Marcus stood a few feet away, waiting. "That didn't go how I planned," Brad said finally. "No, I imagine it didn't. I wanted—" Brad stopped, started over. "When I sent you that invitation, I thought it would be satisfying. Seeing you again, seeing how your life turned out, I thought it would prove something." That you were right about me? Marcus's voice was quiet but steady. That I was worthless? That people like you always win and people like me always lose? Brad flinched. I was a dick to you in high school. Yes, you were. I'm sorry. The words hung in the air between them. Marcus studied Brad's face, looking for insincerity, for the catch. But Brad looked genuinely miserable, shoulders hunched, staring at his expensive shoes. Why? Marcus asked. Why were you such a dick to me? Brad was quiet for a long moment. Because you were better than me. Marcus actually laughed at that. Better? Brad, you had everything. Money, popularity, a future handed to you on a silver platter. I had nothing. You had authenticity. You had purpose. You knew who you were. Brad's voice was bitter. I was just playing a role, the golden boy, the guy everyone expected to succeed, and I hated that you didn't need any of that. You were just yourself, and you didn't care what anyone thought. I cared, Marcus said quietly. Trust me, I cared very much what people thought. But you survived it. You survived me. Brad turned to face him. And look at you now. You saved Catherine Harlow's life. You're raising a daughter alone. You're getting offered a job that most people would kill for. You actually did something meaningful with your life. And you didn't? I'm CEO of my father's company, Brad said flatly. A position I got because of my last name, not because I earned it. I'm married to a woman I'm not sure I love anymore. I throw parties like this to remind myself that I matter, that people remember me. He laughed, a harsh sound. And then you show up with Catherine Harlow, and I realize that I never mattered at all. Not really. I was just loud. Marcus didn't know what to say to that. Part of him wanted to feel satisfaction at Brad's admission, vindication for every humiliation he'd endured, but mostly he just felt tired. I'm sorry I made your life hell, Brad said. I'm sorry about what I said about your mother. I'm sorry I was too much of a coward to be a decent human being when it mattered. He paused. I'm sorry I sent that invitation. I wanted to hurt you, and instead I just proved what an ass I still am. Marcus looked at Brad Wellington, at this man who'd tormented him for years, who'd made him dread going to school every day, who'd kicked him when he was at his lowest. And he saw not a monster, but a deeply unhappy person who'd never learned how to be anything other than what people expected him to be. I appreciate the apology, Marcus said carefully. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, but I appreciate it. Brad nodded, looking relieved just to have gotten the words out. That's more than I deserve. They stood in silence for a moment, the music from the ballroom drifting out through the open doors. For what it's worth, Brad said, I hope you take the job. I hope you build something amazing. I hope you prove everyone wrong who ever doubted you. Including you? Especially me. Catherine appeared in the doorway, backlit by the warm light from inside. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to head out. Early meeting tomorrow. She looked between them, reading the situation quickly. Everything okay here? Yeah, Marcus said. We're good. Brad nodded and headed back inside without another word. Catherine joined Marcus at the railing, standing close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Did he apologize? She asked. He did. Do you believe him? Marcus considered that. I think he meant it. I'm not sure it changes anything, but yeah, I think he meant it. Catherine was quiet for a moment. You know, the hardest thing about success isn't getting it. It's figuring out what to do with it once you have it. Brad has everything he thought he wanted, and it's not enough. It'll never be enough because he didn't build it himself. She looked at Marcus. You, on the other hand, have built everything from nothing. Whatever you do next, it'll be real. It'll matter. I haven't accepted the job yet. You will. Catherine smiled. Because you want to give Lily the life she deserves. Because you're tired of struggling. Because you know you can do it. She pulled out her phone and showed him a photo. This is my daughter, Emma. She's 9. I see her every other weekend because my ex got primary custody in the divorce. Marcus looked at the photo. A dark-haired girl with Catherine's eyes and a gap-toothed smile. I missed so much of her childhood building the company, Catherine said quietly. So many school plays and soccer games and bedtime stories. I told myself it was for her, that I was building a legacy she could be proud of. But the truth is, I was running away from the mess I'd made of my personal life. Work was easier than being a mother. She put the phone away. When I heard you talk about Lily that night in the snow, about how she was your whole world, it broke something in me. Because I'd forgotten how to put my daughter first. I'd forgotten that success doesn't mean anything if you lose the people you love along the way. Catherine looked at him. Take the job, Marcus. But don't make my mistakes. Keep Lily first, always. Marcus felt a lump in his throat. I will. Good. Catherine glanced at her watch. I really do have to go, but I'll have my assistant send over the formal offer letter on Monday. We can negotiate salary, benefits, start date, all of that. No pressure. Catherine, thank you for tonight, for everything. She hugged him, quick and fierce. Thank me by being brilliant. That's all I ask. After she left, Marcus stood on the veranda for a while longer, processing everything that had happened. Inside, the party continued. He could see Brad dancing with his wife, both of them smiling for the photographer, but looking somehow disconnected. He could see James laughing with a group of former classmates, fully in his element. He could see all these people who'd once seemed so important, so untouchable, just living their lives like everyone else. The fear he'd carried for 10 years, the dread of facing these people again, had evaporated. They weren't monsters. They were just people who'd been cruel when they were young, and were now trying to figure out how to live with who they'd been. Marcus pulled out his phone and called Mrs. Rodriguez. How's my girl, Seth? He asked when she answered. Sound asleep. She made me promise to wake her up when you got home so she could hear about the party. Tell her it went well. Tell her I wasn't scared. I will. But Marcus, you sound different, lighter. I feel different. He smiled into the darkness. I think things are going to be okay. When he went back inside, James was waiting by the bar. Ready to get out of here? James asked. Yeah, I think I am. They said their goodbyes. People were surprisingly warm now, asking for his contact information, telling him to stay in touch, and headed for the valet stand. The young man brought around James's Honda, and they climbed in. So, James said as they pulled away from the Wellington estate, that was the craziest night of my life. And I wasn't even the main character. How are you feeling? Marcus thought about it. He felt lighter, yes, but also grounded. Real in a way he hadn't felt in years. I feel like I can breathe, he said finally. Like I've been holding my breath for 10 years, and I finally let it out. You gonna take the job? Yeah, I think I am, James grinned. Marcus Chen, Automotive Division Director. Has a nice ring to it. I haven't even accepted yet. I might be terrible at it. You won't be. You're good at everything you actually try to do. James glanced over at him. You know what the best part of tonight was? Not Catherine showing up, though that was epic. Not Brad's face when he realized he'd miscalculated, though that was pretty great. The best part was watching you realize that you're not that scared kid anymore. You're not the guy who has to take it because he has no other choice. You're someone who gets to choose. Marcus let that sink in. James was right. For the first time in a long time, he had choices. Real choices that could change the trajectory of his life and Lily's. When they pulled up to Marcus's apartment building, the lights were still on in his unit. Mrs. Rodriguez appeared at the window, waving. I think Lily convinced her to let her stay up, Marcus said, amused. Can't blame her. This is big news. James clapped him on the shoulder. Go tell your daughter that her dad is a superhero. Because tonight proved it. Marcus climbed the stairs to his apartment, and before he could even get his key in the lock, the door flew open. Lily stood there in her pajamas, eyes bright with curiosity. Did you dance? She demanded. Was the food fancy? Were the bullies nice? Marcus scooped her up, hugging her tight. It was perfect. Everything was perfect. Mrs. Rodriguez gathered her things, declining payment as always, and left with a knowing smile. Marcus carried Lily to the couch and told her about the evening, editing out the harder parts but keeping the important bits. He told her about Catherine, about the story she'd told, about the job offer. So you're not going to fix cars anymore? Lily asked, yawning against his shoulder. I might still fix cars, but I'll also get to help design them, make them better. It's a big job. Will we move? Maybe, to a nicer place, with your own room. Lily considered this sleepily. Can we still go to the park? Absolutely. Then okay. She yawned again. I told you that you should go, Daddy. I told you not to hide. You did, and you were right. Marcus kissed her forehead. You're always right. I know, she said matter-of-factly, and he laughed. He carried her to bed, tucked her in, and watched her fall asleep within seconds. Then he went back to the living room and sat in the quiet, letting the events of the evening wash over him. His phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Monday, 9 a.m., my office. We'll discuss details. Congratulations, Marcus. You've earned this. Another text came through, this one from a number he didn't immediately recognize. This is Brad. I meant what I said tonight. I'm sorry. I hope you'll accept my apology someday. And I hope you kill it at Harlow Technologies. Marcus stared at that message for a long time before finally typing back, Thank you. I hope you find what you're looking for, too. He set down his phone and looked around his small, shabby apartment. The water-stained ceiling, the worn carpet, the refrigerator that hummed too loudly. This had been his life for so long, this constant struggle to keep his head above water. But tomorrow things would be different, not perfect. Life was never perfect, but different, better, full of possibility. Marcus thought about his mother, wondered what she would say if she could see him now. He thought about Sarah, about the future they'd planned that had been cut so short. He thought about the scared 18-year-old he'd been, certain that his life was over before it had really begun. And he realized that he'd been wrong. His life hadn't ended when his mother died, or when Sarah's car hit that tree, or when he'd given up his scholarship to raise Lily alone. It had just taken a different path, a harder path maybe, but one that had led him here, to this moment, to this chance. He pulled out his phone one more time and opened a note app, typing quickly before he lost the courage. Dear Lily, someday you'll read this and understand. Tonight your dad went to a party he was scared to attend. He faced people who'd hurt him, who'd made him feel small, and he learned something important. Being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you do the thing anyway. You showed me that, sweetheart. You, with your questions and your wisdom and your refusal to let your dad hide from the past. I want you to know that everything I do, every choice I make, it's for you. But tonight taught me that sometimes doing something for you means doing something for myself too. It means being the kind of father who doesn't run from challenges, who stands up for himself, who builds a life worth living. Thank you for being my reason. Thank you for being my courage. Thank you for being exactly who you are. Love, Daddy. He saved the note in a folder he'd created years ago, full of letters to Lily that he'd give her someday when she was old enough to understand. Then he stood up, turned off the lights, and went to bed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears, new uncertainties. But for the first time in a very long time, Marcus Chen went to sleep feeling like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. Morning came too early. Marcus woke to sunlight streaming through the thin curtains and the sound of Lily singing off-key in the kitchen. For a moment, he lay there disoriented, wondering if last night had been a dream. But then he saw James's suit hanging on the back of his door, saw Catherine's business card on his nightstand, and knew it had all been real. He found Lily at the kitchen table, surrounded by her art supplies, working on something with intense concentration. When she saw him, she held up a drawing of two figures, one tall, one small, holding hands under a bright yellow sun. "It's us at your new job," she announced. "You're wearing a tie because you're important now." Marcus's throat tightened. "I'm not more important than I was yesterday, sweetheart. I'm the same person." "I know, but now other people know it too." She said it with the simple certainty of a child who believed absolutely in her father's worth. He made them breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, nothing fancy, and they ate together while Lily peppered him with questions about the party. She wanted to know what Catherine looked like, what the house looked like, whether there had been a chocolate fountain. Marcus answered each question patiently, leaving out the harder parts, the confrontation with Brad, the weight of public scrutiny. Those were his burdens to carry, not hers. After breakfast, Lily went to play in her room, and Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his phone, staring at Catherine's business card. Monday, 9 in the morning, 2 days away. 2 days to prepare himself for a completely different life. His phone rang. "James." "Tell me you're not backing out," James said without preamble. "I'm not backing out." "Good. Because I've been telling everyone at Morrison's about it, and you're basically a legend now. Don said he always knew you were destined for bigger things. Marcus smiled despite himself. Don spent 3 years trying to get me to work Sundays. Yeah, well, now he's telling people he mentored you. Human nature, man. Everyone wants to be part of a success story. James paused. You're taking the job, right? Because if you're having second thoughts, I'm not. I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. Don't overthink it. Catherine Harlow doesn't offer jobs to people she doesn't believe in. You saved her life, yeah, but she's not running a charity. She thinks you can do this. So do I. After they hung up, Marcus spent the rest of the morning researching Harlow Technologies. He read articles about Catherine's rise to prominence, about how she'd taken her father's failing plumbing supply company and transformed it into a tech conglomerate. He read about her divorce, about the custody battle, about the year the company almost went under before she made a series of risky decisions that paid off spectacularly. The more he read, the more he understood why she'd connected with his story that night in the snow. She knew what it was like to fight when everything seemed lost. She knew what it was like to rebuild from nothing. Sunday passed in a blur of nervous energy. Marcus took Lily to the park, helped her with a school project, made dinner, put her to bed. Normal things that felt surreal in light of what was coming. Tomorrow, his life would change, and he couldn't quite believe it was real. That night, after Lily was asleep, his phone buzzed with a text from a number he recognized now. Brad. I know this is weird, but I wanted to say something. You didn't have to be kind to me last night. You had every right to tell me to go to hell. Thank you for not doing that. Marcus stared at the message for a long time. Brad had been his tormentor, the source of so much pain and humiliation, but he'd also been a scared kid playing a role he didn't know how to escape. Marcus understood that now in a way he couldn't have at 18. We were both kids, Marcus typed back. We both made mistakes. Let's leave it in the past. Brad's response came quickly. I'd like that. And if you ever need anything, a reference, a connection, whatever, let me know. I mean it. Marcus set down his phone, feeling something shift in his chest. It wasn't quite forgiveness. That would take time, maybe years. But it was something. A letting go of the anger he'd carried for so long. That anger had been heavy, exhausting. He was tired of carrying it. Monday morning arrived with rain and gray skies. Marcus dropped Lily off at school, watching her run through the doors with her too big backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Mrs. Rodriguez met him at the entrance. Big day, she said, smiling warmly. Yeah, I'm terrified. Good. Means you care. Means it matters. She squeezed his arm. Lily told me all about it. She's so proud of you, Marcus. We all are. The drive to Harlow Technologies took 40 minutes through rush hour traffic. The building was downtown, all glass and steel, the kind of place Marcus had driven past 1,000 times without ever imagining he'd work there. He parked in the visitor lot, straightened his tie, the same one he'd worn to the reunion, and walked through the revolving doors into a lobby that was all marble and minimalist furniture. The receptionist smiled when he gave his name. Ms. Harlow is expecting you. 20th floor, suite 2001. The elevator ride felt like it took hours. Marcus watched the numbers climb, his stomach churning with nerves. What was he doing? He was a mechanic. He fixed transmissions and changed oil. He had no business running a division of a major tech company. But then he thought about Lily's drawing, about Catherine's faith in him, about the life he could build if he just had the courage to try. The elevator doors opened onto a sleek hallway with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A young woman in a sharp suit was waiting. Mr. Chen, I'm Jessica, Ms. Harlow's executive assistant. She's finishing up a call, but she'll be right with you. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? Water would be great. Jessica led him to a conference room with a view that made his breath catch. The city spread out below them, cars and buildings and people going about their lives, unaware that Marcus Chen was about to step into a future he'd never dared imagine. Catherine entered a few minutes later, looking effortlessly professional in a navy suit, her hair pulled back in the same chignon she'd worn to the reunion. She smiled when she saw him, and some of his nervousness eased. Marcus, thank you for coming. She sat down across from him, pulling out a folder thick with documents. I know this is overwhelming. Let's start simple. Tell me what you're thinking. I'm thinking I don't know what I'm doing. Catherine laughed. Good. That's honest. Let me tell you what I'm thinking. I need someone to oversee our new automotive division. We're partnering with several manufacturers to develop next-generation electric vehicles, and we need someone who understands both the technology and the practical application. Someone who knows cars inside and out. I know how to fix them. That's not the same as designing them. You'll have a team of engineers for design. What you bring is real-world knowledge. You know what breaks, what works, what drivers actually need versus what manufacturers think they need. That's invaluable. Catherine slid a document across the table. This is the official offer. Base salary is $180,000 with performance bonuses. Full benefits including health, dental, vision, childcare assistance up to $15,000 per year, 4 weeks paid vacation, stock options that vest over 4 years. Marcus stared at the numbers, his brain struggling to process them. $180,000. He currently made $38,000 at Morrison's. That's more than generous, he managed. It's competitive for the position, and you're worth it. Catherine paused. I need you to believe that, Marcus. You're not a charity case. You're not someone I'm giving a handout. You're someone I want on my team because I think you'll excel. Can you believe that? He looked at her, at this woman who'd remembered him 5 years later, who'd come to his rescue when he'd expected to face his demons alone. She believed in him. James believed in him. Lily believed in him. Maybe it was time to believe in himself. Yes, Marcus said. I can believe that. Good, Catherine smiled. Then let's talk logistics. The position is based here in the city. You'll need to relocate, which the company will cover. We'll help you find an apartment, handle moving costs, all of that. There's a learning curve. You'll be working closely with our engineering team, attending meetings with partners, representing the company at industry events. But I'll be there to guide you through it. They spent the next 2 hours going over details. Catherine introduced him to key members of the team via video call, all of whom seemed genuinely excited to work with him. She showed him the facility where they'd be developing the new vehicles, a state-of-the-art space that made Morrison's look like a relic from another century. By the time they finished, Marcus's head was spinning with information, but he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, tangible hope for a future that didn't involve scraping by, struggling to make rent, worrying about what would happen if Lily got sick and he couldn't afford the doctor. When can you start? Catherine asked as they walked back to the elevator. I need to give Morrison's 2 weeks' notice, and I need to talk to Lily about moving. Of course. Take the time you need. We'll be ready whenever you are. Catherine extended her hand. Welcome to Harlow Technologies, Marcus. Her handshake was firm, professional, sealing a deal that felt like so much more than just a job. Marcus drove home in a daze, his mind racing with possibilities and logistics and 1,000 questions. He picked up Lily from school and took her to their favorite pizza place, the one with the arcade games she loved. Over slices that were mostly cheese and grease, he told her about the job, about the move, about how their lives were going to change. Lily listened with her characteristic seriousness, asking questions about her new school, about whether she'd still see Mrs. Rodriguez, about whether they could bring all her drawings to the new apartment. What about James? She asked. Will we still see him? Of course. We're not moving far, just to the city. And you'll still be my dad? The question broke his heart a little. Always. No matter what changes, that never will. Lily seemed to accept this. She ate her pizza thoughtfully, then looked up at him with those dark eyes that were so much like her mother's. I think Mommy would be proud of you, she said quietly. Marcus's vision blurred. He reached across the table and took her small hand in his. I think she'd be proud of you too. You're the best thing she ever gave me. That night, after Lily was asleep, Marcus sat on the fire escape outside his apartment window, looking out at the city lights in the distance. His phone buzzed with messages, congratulations from James, logistics from Catherine's assistant, even a brief note from Mrs. Rodriguez saying she'd help however she could with the transition. But it was another message, one that came in near midnight that made him pause. It was from Brad. No words, just a photo. A check made out to the Westridge Academy Scholarship Fund in memory of Marcus's mother. The amount was substantial, enough to put several kids through school. Marcus stared at it for a long time, then typed back, "Thank you." She would have liked that. Brad's response was immediate. I should have done it years ago. Better late than never, I hope. Better late than never, Marcus agreed. The 2 weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Marcus gave his notice at Morrison's, and Dawn threw him an impromptu going-away party that involved cheap beer and heartfelt speeches about how they'd always known he was too good for the place. James promised to visit every weekend, threatened to embarrass Marcus at his fancy new job, and helped him pack up the apartment. Catherine's team found them a 2-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood with good schools. It had hardwood floors and a dishwasher and windows that actually closed all the way. The first time Lily saw her new room, bigger than their old living room, she cried happy tears. "It's like a princess castle," she whispered, touching the walls like she couldn't believe they were real. Mrs. Rodriguez came to visit before they moved, bringing homemade tamales and tears of pride. She hugged Marcus for a long time and told him she always knew he'd find his way. "You're a good man, Marcus Chen. Don't let anyone ever make you forget that." On Marcus's last day at Morrison's, he stood in the garage he'd worked in for 5 years, breathing in the familiar smell of motor oil and metal. This place had kept him afloat when he was drowning. It had given him purpose when he had none. It wasn't glamorous, but it had been his. "You gonna miss it?" James asked, coming up beside him. "Yeah, I am." "But you're ready to move on?" Marcus thought about that. Ready seemed like too simple a word for what he felt. Terrified, excited, hopeful, grateful. All of those things tangled together in a knot he couldn't quite untangle. "I think so," he said finally. "I think I am." The move happened on a Saturday. Catherine had offered to hire professional movers, but Marcus wanted to do it himself. Wanted this last piece of independence. James recruited a few friends from Morrison's, and they made quick work of it, carrying boxes and furniture down 3 flights of stairs and loading them into a rental truck. Lily supervised from the sidewalk, directing traffic like a tiny general, telling grown men where to put things and whether they were being careful enough with her toy box. "She's going to run a company someday," James observed, watching her with amusement. "Probably," Marcus agreed. By evening, everything was in the new apartment, and Marcus stood in the living room surrounded by boxes, feeling the weight of the change settle over him. This was it. The old life was over. The new one was beginning. He enrolled Lily in her new school, met with her teacher, joined the PTA. He bought work clothes appropriate for an office, learned to navigate downtown traffic, memorized the names of his new colleagues. He showed up early, stayed late, asked questions, and worked harder than he'd ever worked in his life. The learning curve was steep. There were moments when he felt completely out of his depth, when the technical jargon flew over his head and he wondered if Catherine had made a terrible mistake. But she was there at every turn, patient and supportive, introducing him to people who could help, giving him resources, believing in him even when he struggled to believe in himself. 6 weeks into the job, Marcus sat in a meeting with a team of engineers who were presenting designs for the new electric sedan. They'd been talking for 20 minutes about battery placement and weight distribution, and something about it was bothering Marcus, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what. Finally, he raised his hand. The room went quiet. "I'm sorry, I know I'm still learning, but can I ask a question?" The lead engineer, a woman named Dr. Sarah Patel, nodded encouragingly. "Of course." "This battery placement, it's efficient from an engineering standpoint, but what happens when something goes wrong? I've worked on enough cars to know that batteries leak, corrode, fail. With this setup, how does a regular mechanic access it for maintenance? How do you replace it without special equipment?" The room was silent. Dr. Patel looked at the schematics, then at her team. "That's a good question," she said slowly. "We've been so focused on optimal performance that we haven't fully considered serviceability. Because most electric vehicle owners take their cars to dealerships for service," another engineer offered. "But that's expensive," Marcus said, "and not everyone has access to a dealership. If we're trying to make electric vehicles accessible to more people, we need to think about the whole ownership experience, not just the initial purchase." Dr. Patel was nodding now, making notes. "You're absolutely right. We need to redesign this with serviceability in mind." After the meeting, Catherine pulled Marcus aside. "That was exactly what I hired you for," she said. "Real-world perspective that our engineers don't have. Well done." It was the first time Marcus felt like he might actually belong here, like he had something valuable to contribute beyond just being the guy Catherine felt sorry for. The weeks turned into months. Marcus settled into his role, found his footing, started to make real contributions to the project. He hired a small team of mechanics and technicians who understood cars the way he did, who could bridge the gap between engineering theory and practical application. Together, they redesigned key components of the vehicle to be more user-friendly, more maintainable, more real. At home, Lily thrived. Her new school was challenging in the best way, and she made friends quickly. She joined the art club, started taking piano lessons, brought home report cards that made Marcus's chest swell with pride. She was happy in a way she'd never quite been before, secure in their new life in a way that broke and healed his heart simultaneously. On a Tuesday evening in December, 3 months after he'd started at Harlow Technologies, Marcus got a call from an unknown number. "Is this Marcus Chen?" "Yes." "This is Principal Edwards from Westridge Academy. I'm calling because Brad Wellington has established a scholarship in your mother's name, and he's asked if you'd be willing to be part of the selection committee." Marcus sat down heavily. "He what?" "The Chen Memorial Scholarship. It's a full ride for students who've experienced significant hardship and are working to overcome it. Mr. Wellington was very specific that he wanted you involved in choosing the recipients." They talked for 20 minutes about the scholarship, about what it would entail, about the first recipient who'd already been chosen, a kid whose single mother had died of cancer, who was working 2 jobs to stay in school, a kid who reminded Marcus achingly of himself at 18. After he hung up, Marcus called Brad. It was the first time they'd spoken directly since the reunion. "You didn't have to do this," Marcus said. "Yes, I did." Brad's voice was quiet, sincere. "I can't undo what I did to you, but I can try to prevent it from happening to someone else. I can try to be better." "You're doing the work," Marcus said, and meant it. "So are you. I saw the article about Harlow's new vehicle design. Your team's approach to serviceability is revolutionary." They talked for a while about the car, about the scholarship, about their lives. It wasn't friendship. Marcus wasn't sure they'd ever be friends, but it was something, a truce, an understanding, a mutual decision to be better than they'd been. That weekend, Marcus took Lily to visit James. They had dinner at James's apartment, and afterward, while Lily was absorbed in a movie, the 2 men sat on the balcony with beers. "You look different," James observed. "Lighter." "I feel different, like I finally stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop." "You earned this, you know, all of it. It wasn't luck, it was you." Marcus thought about that night 5 years ago, about stopping for a stranger in a blizzard, about choosing kindness when it cost him something, about all the small choices that had led to this moment. "Maybe it was both," he said. "Luck and choice." "I can live with that." James clinked his beer against Marcus's. "To luck and choice, and to you finally getting what you deserve." The holidays came. Marcus's first Christmas bonus was more than he'd made in 6 months at Morrison's. He took Lily shopping, let her pick out toys without checking price tags, bought her new clothes and books and everything she wanted. They got a real tree, decorated it together, made cookies that burned only slightly. On Christmas morning, Lily opened her presents with squeals of delight, then handed Marcus a small wrapped package. "I made it myself," she said proudly. Inside was a photograph she'd drawn around. The 2 of them from the reunion night, Marcus in his borrowed suit, Lily grinning at the camera. She'd drawn a frame around it, gold and elaborate, with words carefully printed along the bottom, "My brave daddy." "It's for your desk at work," Lily explained. "So you remember." "Remember what, sweetheart?" "That you're a superhero, even when you're scared." Marcus pulled her into his lap, holding her tight against his chest, this child who'd saved him as much as he'd saved her. "I love you more than anything in this world," he whispered. "I know," she said. "I love you too." In January, Catherine called Marcus into her office for his 3-month review. He'd been nervous about it, worried that he'd somehow fallen short of expectations despite the positive feedback he'd been receiving. Catherine gestured for him to sit, then closed her laptop and gave him her full attention. "Your team loves you," she said without preamble. "Dr. Patel told me she's never worked with someone who balances innovation with practicality the way you do. Our partners are impressed with the progress we've made, and I'm thrilled with what you're building. Thank you. I've been trying to That's not why I called you in here. Catherine's expression grew serious. I want to talk about what happens next. This automotive division is exceeding all expectations. We're getting interest from manufacturers we never dreamed would partner with us, and it's largely because of the approach you've brought to the project. Marcus didn't know what to say to that. I'm expanding your role, Catherine continued. You'll oversee not just the sedan project, but our entire automotive portfolio. It's a significant promotion with a significant raise. But more than that, I want you to start thinking long-term. 5 years from now, I want you to be a VP. 10 years from now, maybe C-suite. Catherine, I don't have an MBA. I barely finished community college. And I started as a plumber's daughter with a community college degree myself. Credentials open doors, but character keeps them open. You have something most people spend their whole careers trying to develop: integrity, vision, and the ability to inspire people. That's worth more than any degree. She slid a document across the desk. This is the new offer. Take your time reviewing it. But Marcus, I want you to start seeing yourself the way I see you, the way your team sees you, not as someone who got lucky, but as someone who earned every bit of this. Marcus looked at the numbers. They were staggering. And then at Catherine, this woman who'd believed in him when he couldn't believe in himself. Why? He asked. Why did you really come to that reunion? You could have just offered me the job. You didn't need to stand up for you? Catherine's smile was sad. Yes, I did. Because I know what it's like to be dismissed, to be underestimated, to have people assume you don't belong. And I know that sometimes the people who deserve support the most are the ones least likely to ask for it. She paused. You saved my life, Marcus. Literally. But you also reminded me what kind of person I wanted to be. Coming to that reunion, standing beside you, that was me trying to be that person. That was me paying forward the kindness you showed me. You've done more than pay it forward. You've changed my life. No, you changed your life. I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it. That evening, Marcus picked up Lily from her piano lesson and took her to their favorite park. They sat on a bench, watching other kids play, the winter sun setting behind the buildings. Daddy? Lily said. Are you happy? It was such a simple question, but it stopped him cold. Was he happy? For so long, happiness had seemed like a luxury he couldn't afford. He'd been focused on survival, on getting through each day, on providing for Lily. Happiness had been something other people got to experience. But now, sitting here with his daughter, thinking about his job and his team and the life they'd built, he realized the answer was yes. Yeah, Lil, I think I am. Good, me too. She leaned against him, and they sat there as the sun went down, two people who'd fought their way through darkness and finally found light. A week later, Marcus got an invitation to speak at a Westridge Academy assembly about the Chen Memorial Scholarship. He almost said no. The thought of going back there, even as a success story, made his stomach churn. But then he thought about the kid who'd received the first scholarship, about how much it would have meant to 18-year-old Marcus to see someone who'd been where he was and made it through. He said yes. The morning of the assembly, he stood backstage in the Westridge Auditorium, listening to the students file in, their voices echoing off the walls the same way they had when he'd been one of them. Brad was there too, having funded the scholarship, looking almost as nervous as Marcus felt. Thank you for doing this, Brad said quietly. Thank you for creating it. They stood there for a moment, two men who'd caused each other pain, who were both trying to be better than they'd been. I'm sorry, Brad said again. I know I've said it before, but I know. Marcus met his eyes. I forgive you. The words surprised them both. Marcus hadn't planned to say them, hadn't been sure he was ready. But standing there, about to speak to a room full of kids who were probably scared and struggling and trying to figure out who they were, he realized that forgiveness wasn't about Brad. It was about Marcus choosing not to carry that weight anymore. Brad's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Thank you. The principal introduced them, and they walked out onto the stage together. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. Brad Wellington and Marcus Chen, standing side by side, united in trying to help kids who needed it. Marcus told his story. Not the sanitized version, but the real one. He talked about his mother's death, about the bullying, about Sarah and the accident and raising Lily alone. He talked about the years of struggle, the nights he'd cried from exhaustion and fear, the moments he'd wanted to give up. And then he talked about the night in the snow, about choosing to help when it cost him something, about how that one choice had changed everything. "I'm not telling you this to brag," Marcus said, looking out at the sea of young faces. "I'm telling you this because some of you are where I was, scared, struggling, wondering if it gets better. And I want you to know that it does, not easily, not quickly, but it does." He paused, making sure they were listening. "The thing about rock bottom is that it's solid. You can build on it. You can push off from it. And the choices you make when you're at your lowest, those define who you become." I could have driven past that car in the snow. Nobody would have blamed me. But I stopped, and that choice changed my life. The assembly ended with applause that surprised Marcus with its enthusiasm. Afterwards, students lined up to talk to him, to ask questions, to share their own stories. One girl, a sophomore with haunted eyes, told him her mom had just been diagnosed with cancer. "Does it get easier?" she asked, missing them. Marcus thought about his mother, about how some mornings he still reached for the phone to call her before remembering she was gone. "No," he said honestly, "but you get stronger, and that's almost the same thing." He gave her his card, told her to reach out if she ever needed to talk. He gave the same card to a dozen other kids who reminded him of himself at their age. On the drive home, Marcus called Catherine. "How did it go?" she asked. "Better than I expected. Hard, but good." He paused. "I want to do more of this. Mentoring, speaking, whatever helps kids who are struggling." "Then we'll make it part of your role. Corporate outreach, community engagement. You're the perfect person for it." That night, Marcus told Lily about the assembly, about the kids he'd met, about the scholarship that would help them the way he wished he'd been helped. "You're making a difference, Daddy," Lily said seriously, "like a real superhero. I'm just trying to help. That's what superheroes do." She said it like it was obvious. Marcus thought about that later, after she was asleep, while he sat at his desk working on a presentation for the next week. Making a difference. Being a superhero. Such big concepts for such small actions. But maybe that was the point. Maybe changing the world didn't require grand gestures. Maybe it just required showing up, helping when you could, choosing kindness even when it cost you something. His phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. Just a photo, no words. It showed a magazine cover, Forbes, featuring an article about innovative automotive design. The headline read, "How Harlow Technologies is Revolutionizing Electric Vehicles." In smaller print beneath, Marcus Chen's team brings real-world solutions to high-tech problems. Marcus stared at it, still not quite able to believe this was his life. A year ago, he'd been scraping by at Morrison's, living paycheck to paycheck, terrified of what would happen if he got sick or Lily needed something he couldn't afford. Now he was on the cover of Forbes. He saved the photo and added it to the folder of letters he was writing to Lily, the ongoing record of their journey that he'd give her someday when she was old enough to understand just how far they'd come. "Dear Lily, today I spoke at my old school about second chances and choosing kindness. I told them about the night I met Catherine, about how one choice changed everything. But the truth is, every day is a choice, to be bitter or better, to hide or show up, to let the past define us or to build something new. You taught me that, sweetheart. When you asked me if I was scared of my old classmates, when you told me not to hide, you were teaching me courage I didn't know I had. I forgave Brad Wellington today, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved to let it go. Carrying that anger was heavy, and I'm tired of being heavy. I want to be light. I want to be the kind of father who shows you that grace is stronger than revenge, that being kind is braver than being cruel. I hope when you read this, you'll understand. I hope you'll be proud. Love always, Daddy." He closed the laptop and sat in the quiet of their apartment, listening to the sounds of the city outside, feeling the weight of everything that had changed and everything that hadn't. He was still Marcus Chen, still a father first and everything else second, still someone who'd rather fix a broken thing than throw it away. Still learning, still growing, still figuring it out one day at a time. But now he was also someone who'd chosen forgiveness over revenge, grace over anger, hope over fear. And that made all the difference. The years that followed moved with the strange elasticity of time when life is finally going well, simultaneously racing forward and stretching out with moments worth savoring. Marcus watched Lily grow from a serious 7-year-old into a thoughtful teenager, her questions becoming more complex, her understanding of the world deepening in ways that both terrified and amazed him. The automotive division flourished under Marcus's leadership. The electric sedan they'd developed launched to critical acclaim, praised for its innovative design and unprecedented serviceability. Within 3 years, Harlow Technologies had become a major player in the automotive industry, and Marcus's team had expanded from a handful of mechanics and engineers to over 200 employees across multiple facilities. Catherine promoted him to vice president as promised, then to senior vice president. His office had a view of the entire city, and sometimes Marcus would stand at the window and think about the apartment where he and Lily had lived, about Morrison's auto repair, about how far they'd come. But success brought its own challenges. The higher he climbed, the more time work demanded. There were late meetings and business trips, conferences in other cities, and dinners with investors. Marcus fought against it, remembering Catherine's warning about missing her daughter's childhood, but the pull was constant and insidious. It was Lily, now 12 years old and sharp as ever, who called him on it. They were supposed to have dinner together on a Thursday evening, their standing date night that Marcus had promised would be sacred. But a crisis at the manufacturing facility demanded his attention, and he texted her that he'd be late, then later still. By the time he got home at 9:30, she was in her room, door closed, homework abandoned on her desk. Marcus knocked softly. "Lil? I'm sorry I missed dinner. There was a problem with—" "There's always a problem." Her voice was flat, tired in a way that 12-year-olds shouldn't sound. He opened the door. Lily was sitting on her bed, still dressed, looking at him with an expression that reminded him painfully of Sarah, disappointed but not surprised. "That's not fair," Marcus said. "This was important." "I'm important too." She said it quietly, without anger, which somehow made it worse. Or at least I used to be. The words hit him like a physical blow. Marcus sat down on the edge of her bed, suddenly seeing himself through her eyes. The father who was always checking his phone during breakfast, who scheduled quality time like business meetings, who talked about work even when he was supposed to be present. "You're the most important thing in my life," he said. "You know that." "Do I?" Lily looked at him with those dark, serious eyes. "Because it feels like your job is the most important thing. I get it, Dad. I do. You worked so hard to get here, and you're helping people, and it matters. But I miss you. I miss the dad who took me to the park and made me breakfast and didn't check his email during our conversations." Marcus felt something crack in his chest. She was right. Somewhere in the pursuit of success, in the drive to provide a better life for her, he'd forgotten to actually live that life with her. "I'm sorry," he said. "You're absolutely right. I've been so focused on building something for our future that I've been missing our present." Lily was quiet for a moment. "Do you remember what you told me? When I asked if you were going to that reunion. What did I tell you?" "You said the people there weren't really your friends, and I asked if you were scared of them, and you said no." She paused. "But I think you were scared. Just not of them. Of being poor again. Of not being able to take care of me. So you've been working all the time to make sure that never happens." Marcus stared at his daughter, stunned by her insight. When had she gotten so wise? "But Dad," Lily continued, "we were okay before. When we had the small apartment and you worked at the garage. We were okay because we had each other. And now we have this nice place, and you have this important job, but I see you less. So are we really better off?" It was the question Marcus had been avoiding for months, maybe years. The question that kept him up at night when the silence of success felt lonelier than the struggle had ever been. "No," he admitted. "We're not better off if I'm missing your life." "So what are we going to do about it?" Marcus looked at his daughter, at this incredible person he'd somehow had a hand in raising, and made a decision. "I'm going to fix it, starting now." The next morning, Marcus walked into Catherine's office and asked for a meeting. She took one look at his face and cleared her calendar. "What's wrong?" she asked as soon as the door closed. "I'm losing my daughter." Marcus sat down heavily. "I'm working 60, 70 hours a week, and she's growing up without me, just like you warned me about." Catherine's expression softened with understanding and regret. What do you need? I need to restructure my role, delegate more, set actual boundaries. I need to be home for dinner. I need to make her soccer games and parent-teacher conferences and the random Tuesday afternoons that turn out to matter just as much as the big moments. You want to step back. I want to step into balance. I'm good at my job, but being Lily's father is the most important job I'll ever have, and I'm failing at it. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, her fingers steepled under her chin. When Emma was 12, she stopped calling me Mom. Started calling me Catherine, like I was someone she had to schedule time with instead of her mother. Her voice was soft with old pain. I never got that back. Even now, even though our relationship is better, there's a distance that wouldn't be there if I'd made different choices. I don't want that with Lily. Then let's fix it. Catherine pulled out her laptop. What if we brought in a COO for the automotive division? Someone to handle day-to-day operations while you focus on strategy and vision. You'd still be SVP, still drive the direction, but you'd have support, real support that lets you leave at 5. That would require hiring someone senior. The budget is my concern, not yours. You built this division from nothing, Marcus. You've earned the right to shape it in a way that works for your life. She smiled. Besides, you're more valuable to me when you're whole. A burnt-out executive helps no one. They spent the next hour mapping out a transition plan. Catherine already had someone in mind for COO, a woman named Patricia Chen, no relation, who'd been running operations at a competitor. Within a week, they'd made the offer. Within a month, Patricia had started, and Marcus felt the weight on his shoulders begin to ease. He started leaving the office at 5. He turned off email notifications after 6. He blocked out Lily's soccer games and school events in his calendar and treated them as unmissable as any board meeting. He was home for dinner most nights, helping with homework, asking about her day, being present in a way he hadn't been in too long. The change in Lily was immediate and profound. She smiled more, talked more, sought him out to share random thoughts and observations instead of retreating to her room. They fell back into their old rhythm, the easy companionship that had sustained them through the hardest years. One Saturday afternoon, Marcus took Lily to visit James, who'd recently gotten engaged and was full of wedding planning stress. They sat in James's backyard, grilling burgers and laughing at his fiancée Maria's increasingly elaborate Pinterest boards. "Remember when we used to dream about having a backyard?" James said, flipping a burger. "And now I have one, and all I do is complain about mowing it." "The grass is always greener," Marcus agreed, then caught himself and laughed. "Literally, in your case." Lily was inside with Maria, apparently providing critical input on flower arrangements. Through the window, Marcus could see his daughter gesturing enthusiastically, her whole face lit up with engagement. "She's doing well," James observed. "Different than she was a year ago. I was losing her for a while there, got too caught up in work." "But you course-corrected. That's what matters." James handed Marcus a beer. "You know what I've always admired about you? You're not too proud to admit when you're wrong and fix it. Most people just dig in and defend their mistakes. I've made enough mistakes to know they don't get better by ignoring them." They drank in comfortable silence, the kind only old friends could share. James had been there through everything, the worst times, and now these better ones. He'd never wavered, never judged, never expected Marcus to be anything other than who he was. "You're a good friend," Marcus said suddenly. "I don't think I tell you that enough." James looked surprised, then pleased. "Back at you, man. Back at you." As the months passed, Marcus found a rhythm that worked. The division continued to thrive under Patricia's management, and Marcus discovered he was actually better at the strategic visionary role than the day-to-day operations he'd been grinding through. He started speaking more at industry conferences, writing articles about accessible design and real-world engineering, building a reputation as someone who bridged the gap between innovation and practicality. The Chen Memorial Scholarship had grown too. Brad had increased the endowment significantly, and now 5 students a year received full rides to Westridge Academy. Marcus stayed involved in the selection process, meeting each recipient, offering mentorship and support. He saw himself in each of them, kids who'd been dealt bad hands but were fighting to overcome them. One of those kids, a girl named Maya, whose father had died and whose mother worked 3 jobs, reminded him especially of his younger self. She had that same fierce determination mixed with barely concealed fear, that sense of being one disaster away from losing everything. Marcus took her under his wing, met with her monthly, helped her navigate not just school but the emotional complexity of grief and survival. He saw her start to relax, to believe that maybe things could work out, to trust that there were people who would catch her if she fell. "You're like the dad I wish I had," Maya told him once, then immediately looked horrified. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "Don't apologize," Marcus said gently. "I'm honored." He told Lily about Maya that night, about the mentorship and how much it meant to him to help her. Lily listened thoughtfully, then said something that stopped him in his tracks. "I think that's your real gift, Dad. Not engineering or business. Seeing people who need help and actually helping them." It was such a simple observation, but it crystallized something Marcus had been feeling for a while. The work he loved most wasn't designing cars or managing divisions. It was the human element. Mentoring young engineers, supporting scholarship recipients, speaking to students about resilience and second chances. He talked to Catherine about it during one of their regular check-ins. "I want to do more with the scholarship program," he said. "Expand it, not just at Westridge, but at schools across the country. Create a whole network of support for kids who are struggling." Catherine smiled. "I was wondering when you'd get there. I have a proposal for you." She laid out her vision, a new position, Chief Impact Officer, focused entirely on corporate social responsibility, educational initiatives, and community outreach. The automotive division would report to someone else. But Marcus would build something entirely new, something that combined his engineering background with his passion for helping people. "It's a lateral move in title, but an expansion in impact," Catherine explained. "You'd be designing programs, not cars, changing lives, not industries." "What do you think?" Marcus thought about Maya, about the Westridge students, about every kid who needed someone to believe in them the way Catherine had believed in him. "I think it's perfect." The transition happened over 6 months. Marcus trained his replacement, Patricia stepped into the SVP role seamlessly, while simultaneously building out the framework for Harlow Technologies' new Impact division. They launched scholarship programs at 20 schools in underserved communities. They created mentorship networks pairing industry professionals with struggling students. They funded after-school programs and summer internships and workshops in practical skills. And Marcus was at the center of it all, energized in a way he hadn't been since those early days in the automotive division. This felt right. This felt like what he was meant to be doing. Lily, now 14, started getting involved too. She volunteered with the mentorship program, tutoring younger kids in math and science. She helped organize fundraising events and spoke at program launches with the same thoughtful seriousness she'd had as a child. "She's a natural," Catherine observed, watching Lily work a room at a donor event with surprising ease. "You must be proud." "Terrified, mostly," Marcus admitted. "She's so much braver than I ever was." "She learned it from you." Marcus wasn't sure about that, but he was grateful for it regardless. On Lily's 15th birthday, Marcus took her to dinner at a nice restaurant downtown. Just the two of them, no phones, no distractions. Over pasta and breadsticks, Lily asked him a question he'd been dreading. "Do you ever think about Mom?" Marcus set down his fork carefully. They didn't talk about Sarah often. The pain was still there, even after all these years. But Lily had been asking more lately, trying to piece together the mother she'd never really known. "Every day," Marcus said honestly. "She was extraordinary, Lil. Smart and funny and so kind. You have her eyes, her smile, her way of cutting through nonsense to see what really matters." "Do you think she'd be proud of me?" "She'd be amazed by you. You're everything she hoped you'd be and more." Lily was quiet for a moment, pushing pasta around her plate. "I'm glad you met Catherine. I'm glad you stopped to help her that night." "Me too. But do you think—" Lily hesitated. "Do you think Mom would be okay with how things turned out? With us being happy when she's not here to see it?" Marcus's throat tightened. She was 15, asking questions that cut to the heart of survivor's guilt, wrestling with the same feelings he'd battled for years. "Your mom loved you more than anything," Marcus said carefully. "And the last thing she said to me before the accident was that she wanted us to be happy. She wanted you to have a good life. So yes, I think she'd be okay with it. More than okay." I think she'd be grateful that we found a way through. Lily nodded, blinking back tears. I wish I remembered her better. Sometimes I'm not sure if what I remember is real or just from photos and stories. Both can be true. And either way, she's part of you. In the way you think, the way you care about people, the way you're not afraid to ask hard questions. That's all her. They finished dinner talking about Sarah, sharing memories and stories, keeping her alive in the way people do when they're all that's left to remember. On the drive home, Lily said quietly, "Thank you for always talking about her. Some of my friends whose parents died said their families never mentioned them, like it's too painful. But I like that we do. I like that she's still part of our lives." "She'll always be part of our lives," Marcus promised. Time continued its relentless march. Lily started high school at a prestigious private school, ironically not Westridge, but a place with a strong arts program where she could pursue her love of painting and music. She thrived there, making friends, joining clubs, becoming someone who moved through the world with quiet confidence. The Impact Division grew beyond Marcus's wildest expectations. Within 3 years, they'd expanded to 50 schools and were supporting over 200 students annually. The mentorship program had been replicated by other companies, and Marcus found himself consulting with Fortune 500 CEOs about corporate responsibility and community engagement. He started getting recognition for the work, awards from educational foundations, speaking invitations from major conferences, profiles in business magazines. But the accolades that mattered most came from the kids themselves. The scholarship recipients who came back to say thank you, who showed him their college acceptance letters, who told him the programs had changed their lives. Maya, the girl who'd reminded him of himself, graduated from Westridge at the top of her class and got a full ride to MIT. She called Marcus the day she got the acceptance letter, crying with joy and disbelief. "I never thought this was possible," she said. "I never thought someone like me could go to MIT." "Someone like you belongs at MIT," Marcus told her. "You earned this. But I couldn't have done it without you. Without the scholarship, without the mentoring, without someone believing I could." "Then pay it forward. When you're successful, and you will be, remember what it felt like to need help, and help someone else." "I will. I promise." Brad Wellington stayed involved with the scholarship program too, though he and Marcus maintained a cordial distance. They worked together professionally, collaborated on expanding the program, but they weren't friends. The wounds from high school had scarred over, but not disappeared entirely. Until Brad called one evening, his voice tight with emotion. "I need to tell you something," Brad said, "and I'm not sure how to say it, so I'm just going to say it. I'm getting divorced." Marcus was surprised, but not shocked. He'd seen Brad and his wife at events over the years, had noticed the tension between them, the way they smiled for cameras but barely spoke to each other. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, meaning it. "Don't be. It's been over for a long time. We just kept pretending because that's what we do, right? Pretend everything's perfect." Brad laughed bitterly. "I've been thinking about what you said at the reunion, about not carrying anger because it costs too much. I've been carrying something too, this idea of what my life was supposed to be. Perfect marriage, perfect job, perfect everything, and it's been killing me." "So what are you going to do?" "I don't know. Figure out who I actually am instead of who everyone expects me to be." Brad paused. "I know we're not friends, Marcus. I know I don't deserve your advice or your time, but you're the only person I know who rebuilt their entire life from scratch and came out better for it. How did you do it?" Marcus thought about that question, about the years of struggle and doubt and slow, painful progress. "I stopped trying to be someone else," he said finally. "I stopped comparing my life to other people's lives. I just focused on being a good father and a good person, and everything else built from that." Sounds simple when you say it like that. It's not simple. It's the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's worth it. They talked for an hour, the longest conversation they'd had in years. Brad shared his fears about the divorce, about disappointing his family, about starting over at 40. Marcus listened, offered perspective, shared his own experiences with loss and rebuilding. When they hung up, Marcus felt something shift. Not quite forgiveness, that had happened years ago, but something deeper, understanding, compassion, the recognition that everyone was fighting their own battles, even the people who seemed to have it all. Lily graduated from high school with honors. Marcus sat in the audience at her graduation, watching her walk across the stage to receive her diploma, and felt the same overwhelming pride mixed with terror he'd felt the day she was born. She was heading to college in the fall, planning to study social work and psychology, wanting to help people the way she'd seen her father help people. "I want to make a difference," she'd told him when announcing her major. "Like you do." "You already make a difference," he'd said, "just by being who you are." But she was determined, and Marcus recognized that determination. It was his own, reflected back at him in this incredible person he'd had the privilege of raising. The night before Lily left for college, they sat on the couch in their apartment. They'd upgraded several times over the years, but it still felt like home in a way the Wellington estate never could. And Marcus pulled out a folder he'd been saving. "What's this?" Lily asked. "Letters. I've been writing them to you since you were 7, since the night of the reunion." Lily opened the folder with careful hands, reading through letters that chronicled their journey. Marcus watched her face as she read, saw tears slip down her cheeks, saw her smile at memories she'd forgotten or never fully understood. When she finished, she looked at him with red eyes and a trembling smile. "You've been writing about me this whole time? About us? About our journey? About all the things I wanted you to know when you were old enough to understand them. These are beautiful, Dad. This is—" her voice cracked. "This is the best gift anyone's ever given me." "You're the best gift anyone's ever given me," Marcus said. "Everything good in my life started with you." They hugged, father and daughter, and Marcus thought about all the years that had led to this moment, the struggle and the success, the pain and the healing, the fear and the courage. The next day, Marcus helped Lily move into her dorm. Catherine came too, bringing care packages and practical advice, and the kind of support she'd shown them from the beginning. They made up Lily's bed, helped her organize her desk, met her roommate and the roommate's parents. When it was time to leave, Lily walked Marcus back to his car. They stood in the parking lot, neither quite ready to say goodbye. "I'm going to miss you," Lily said. "I'm going to miss you too, but you're ready for this. More than ready. Are you going to be okay? Without me?" Marcus smiled. "I'm going to be fine. I have work that matters. I have people who care about me. I have a life that I've built, piece by piece, into something I'm proud of." "Good." Lily hugged him tight. "Because you taught me that life goes on, that we keep going even when it's hard, that we choose hope over fear and kindness over cruelty and presence over perfection." "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from the best." They said their goodbyes, and Marcus drove home with tears streaming down his face, feeling the bittersweet ache of a job well done. He'd raised his daughter. He'd given her the tools she needed to build her own life, and now he had to let her go and trust that she'd use them well. Back at the apartment, it felt too quiet. Marcus wandered from room to room, seeing evidence of Lily everywhere, photos on the walls, her artwork on the fridge, the indent on the couch where she always sat. He'd known this day was coming, had prepared himself for it, but the reality was still overwhelming. His phone rang. "Catherine. How are you holding up?" she asked. "I'm a mess," Marcus admitted. "I know she's just at college. I know she'll be home for holidays, but the apartment feels empty." Emma called me after her first day at college. She was crying, said she was homesick and wanted to come back. I told her to give it a week. She called back 3 days later, excited about her classes and her new friends, wondering why I'd ever suggested she might want to leave. Catherine paused. "They grow up. They leave. That's the goal. Doesn't make it easier." "No, it doesn't." "But Marcus, you did it. You raised an incredible young woman who's going to change the world. You should be proud." "I am. I'm just also sad." "Both can be true." They talked for a while longer, and by the time they hung up, Marcus felt a little steadier. He ordered dinner, too much food for one person, old habits dying hard, and settled in to watch a movie. Halfway through, his phone buzzed with a text from Lily. A photo of her and her roommate, both grinning at the camera, with the caption, "First night of the rest of my life. Love you, Dad. Thank you for everything." Marcus saved the photo and sent back, "Love you too. Make it count." In the months that followed, Marcus adapted to his new normal. He threw himself into work, expanding the impact division even further. They launched an initiative specifically focused on single parents, providing resources and support for people struggling to raise kids alone. He spoke openly about his own experience, about the fear and exhaustion, moments of doubt, and people responded to that honesty. The program took off. Within a year, they were supporting 500 single parents across the country with everything from childcare assistance to career counseling to financial planning. Marcus heard from participants regularly, thanking him, telling him how much the support meant. One letter came from a woman in Ohio who was raising 3 kids alone after her husband's death. She wrote about how the program had given her hope when she was ready to give up, how Marcus's story had shown her that it was possible to survive and even thrive. "You probably don't remember what it's like," she wrote, "now that you're successful and your daughter is grown. But for those of us still in the trenches, your story matters. It shows us that this struggle is temporary, that there's light at the end of the tunnel." Marcus wrote back immediately, assuring her that he remembered every minute of the struggle, that success hadn't erased those memories or made them less real. He offered to connect her with resources, to help in whatever way he could. That exchange stayed with him. He realized he had a responsibility to keep sharing his story, not to brag about how far he'd come, but to show others that the journey was possible. So when a publisher approached him about writing a book, he said yes. The book took 2 years to write. Marcus poured everything into it, the grief and the struggle, the kindness of strangers and the cruelty of bullies, the moment in the snow that changed everything, and the reunion that brought it full circle. He wrote about fatherhood and fear, about choosing kindness and the power of second chances. He titled it "Stopping in the Snow: How One Choice Changed Everything." Catherine wrote the foreword. Brad contributed an epilogue about accountability and growth. Maya, now thriving at MIT, wrote a chapter about mentorship and hope. But the heart of the book was Marcus's own story, told with unflinching honesty and hard-won wisdom. The book came out the same year Lily graduated from college. It became a surprise bestseller, resonating with people who'd experienced their own struggles and needed to know they weren't alone. Marcus did a book tour speaking to packed auditoriums about resilience and redemption. At one event, a young single father approached him holding a baby who couldn't have been more than 6 months old. "I just wanted to say thank you," the man said, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm where you were 20 years ago. Scared, struggling, wondering if I can do this. Your book showed me I can." Marcus looked at the baby, at the father who was so clearly exhausted and overwhelmed and trying so hard, and saw himself. "You can do this," Marcus said firmly. "It won't be easy. There will be days when you want to quit. But you'll look at that baby and you'll find strength you didn't know you had. And one day you'll look back and realize you did something extraordinary." "I hope so. I know so." They talked for a few more minutes, and Marcus gave him his contact information, told him to reach out if he ever needed support or advice. The man left looking a little more hopeful, a little less alone. Lily called that night from her apartment. She was living in the city now, working at a nonprofit that supported foster children, excited about the book's success. "Everyone's talking about it, Dad. My coworkers, my friends, random people on the subway. You're famous." "I'm not famous. The story is just resonating with people." "Because it's true. Because you didn't hide the hard parts. Because you showed people that it's okay to struggle and it's possible to overcome." "I had a lot of help." "Yeah, but you also did the work. You chose kindness over anger. You chose to help people instead of becoming bitter. That's what makes the story powerful." Marcus thought about that conversation later, about the choices that had defined his life. Stopping in the snow, going to the reunion, accepting Catherine's job offer, forgiving Brad, restructuring his work to prioritize Lily. Each decision had seemed small at the time, but together they'd built a life he never could have imagined. 5 years after the book came out, Lily called with news that made Marcus cry. "I'm engaged," she said, her voice bubbling with joy. "His name is David. He works at the same nonprofit. And Dad, he's wonderful. You're going to love him." Marcus did love him. David was kind and thoughtful, clearly devoted to Lily, and he treated her with the respect and care she deserved. They got married the following summer in a small ceremony at the park where Marcus and Lily used to feed the ducks. Marcus walked his daughter down the aisle, his heart full to bursting, thinking about Sarah and wishing she could see the incredible woman their daughter had become. "You did good," James whispered as they watched Lily and David exchange vows. "You did real good, man." Catherine was there too, sitting with her daughter Emma, who'd recently started working for the Impact Division. Brad came with his new partner, looking happier than Marcus had ever seen him. Maya was there, now a successful engineer at a major tech company, already mentoring younger women in STEM fields. They were all there, this patchwork family Marcus had built from kindness and circumstance, and he realized that this was the real success. Not the job or the money or the recognition, but the people, the connections, the lives touched and changed and made better. 2 years after Lily's wedding, she called with more news. "You're going to be a grandfather." Marcus sat down hard, overwhelmed. A grandfather. He was going to be a grandfather. The baby, a girl they named Sarah, after her grandmother, arrived on a sunny morning in May. Marcus held her in the hospital, this tiny person with Lily's eyes and Sarah's nose and an entire future ahead of her, and felt the circle complete itself. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Welcome to the world." Lily watched him with her baby, her expression soft with love and contentment. "She's lucky to have you as a grandfather." "I'm lucky to have her, to have all of you." On Sarah's first birthday, the family gathered at Marcus and Lily's childhood park for a celebration. Catherine came, and James and Maria with their 2 kids. Brad was there with his partner and their adopted son. Maya brought her wife and their newborn twins. The scholarship recipients Marcus had mentored over the years, now successful adults in their own right, showed up to celebrate the man who'd helped change their lives. They spread blankets on the grass, ate cake, watched little Sarah toddle around on unsteady legs. Marcus sat with Catherine, both of them gray-haired now, and a little slower than they used to be, watching the chaos with contentment. "Not bad for a mechanic from Morrison's," Catherine observed. "Not bad for a woman in a ditch in a snowstorm." They smiled at each other, these 2 people whose lives had intersected in the most unlikely way and created ripples that had touched hundreds of lives. "Do you ever think about that night?" Catherine asked. "About what would have happened if you'd driven past?" "All the time. I think about how close I came to not stopping, how tired I was, how much I just wanted to get home to Lily." "What made you stop?" Marcus thought about that. "My mother. She raised me to help people, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. I stopped because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't." "One choice," Catherine said softly. "One choice changed everything." "No, lots of choices. Every day we choose who we're going to be. That night was just one choice in a lifetime of them." As the party wound down and people started to leave, Marcus stood with Lily, watching little Sarah sleep in her stroller. "You know what I think about sometimes," Lily said, "about that reunion, about how scared you were to go and how you went anyway because I asked you to. You were very persuasive. I was 7. I didn't know what I was asking, but Dad, I'm so glad you went, because that night set everything else in motion. You faced your fear, and look at what came from it." Marcus looked around at the people gathered in the park. His family, his friends, the lives he'd touched and been touched by. All of it stemming from one night, one choice, one act of courage. "Yeah," he said, "look at what came from it." Years continued to pass. Marcus eventually retired from Harlow Technologies, though he stayed active with the Impact Division as an advisor and mentor. He spent his days with his granddaughter, teaching her about kindness and courage, telling her stories about her grandmother Sarah and great-grandmother Chen. Little Sarah grew into a bright, curious child who asked impossible questions and saw the world with the same seriousness her mother once had. "Grandpa," she asked when she was 6, "why do you help people all the time?" "Because someone helped me when I needed it, and now I get to pass that forward." "Will I help people too?" "I think you already do, sweetheart. Every time you're kind, every time you choose to include someone who's left out, every time you stand up for what's right, that's helping people." Sarah considered this seriously. "Then I want to help lots of people, like you." On the 20th anniversary of the reunion, Westridge Academy held a special event honoring the Chen Memorial Scholarship. 200 students had been supported by the program over the years, and dozens came back for the celebration. Marcus stood on the same stage where he'd once told his story to a skeptical audience and looked out at faces that represented hope and second chances and the power of believing in people. 20 years ago, he began, I walked into the reunion in this very building terrified that I'd be reminded of every failure, every humiliation, every way I'd fallen short. Instead, I was reminded that kindness matters, that people can change, that grace is more powerful than revenge. He looked at Brad, sitting in the front row, who nodded with tears in his eyes. The scholarship that bears my mother's name has changed lives, but it's also changed mine. Every student I meet, every story I hear, every person who overcomes impossible odds, that reminds me why the struggle was worth it. That reminds me that we're all capable of extraordinary things if someone just believes in us. The audience applauded, but Marcus wasn't finished. My daughter once told me that I was a superhero. I laughed it off because I'm not. I'm just a man who made choices, who chose to help instead of ignore, who chose forgiveness instead of anger, who chose presence over success, connection over achievement, love over fear. He paused, finding Lily in the crowd. She was holding Sarah, both of them watching him with identical expressions of pride and love. But maybe that is heroic. Maybe the most extraordinary thing any of us can do is be present for the people we love and kind to the strangers we meet. Maybe changing the world doesn't require grand gestures. Maybe it just requires showing up day after day and choosing to be a little bit better than we were yesterday. Marcus stepped back from the podium to thunderous applause. As he walked off the stage, he was surrounded by scholarship recipients thanking him, by colleagues congratulating him, by people whose lives he'd touched in ways large and small. But the person he was looking for was Lily. She met him at the edge of the crowd, still holding Sarah, and hugged him tight. I'm so proud of you, Dad. I'm proud of you too, of the woman you've become, of the mother you are. Little Sarah squirmed between them, and they laughed, breaking apart. The 6-year-old looked up at Marcus with serious eyes. Grandpa, are you a superhero? Marcus knelt down to her level. No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who tries to be kind. That's the same thing, Sarah said with the certainty of childhood. Mommy told me. She said superheroes are just people who help other people, and you help lots of people, so that makes you a superhero. Marcus looked at Lily, who shrugged with a smile. I may have told her that. He scooped up his granddaughter, holding her close, feeling the weight and wonder of legacy. This child, who carried his daughter's strength and her grandmother's compassion and his own stubborn hope, represented everything he'd fought for, everything he'd built. Then I guess I am a superhero, Marcus said. But so is your mommy, and so are you, when you're kind to people. Really? Really? Sarah beamed at this news and wiggled to be put down, running off to tell her friends about being a superhero. Marcus and Lily stood together, watching her go. You did it, Dad, Lily said quietly. You gave me the life you always wanted me to have, and now I'm giving it to her. No, Marcus corrected gently. We did it. Together. You saved me as much as I saved you. As the evening drew to a close and people started to leave, Marcus found himself alone in the parking lot, looking back at the Westridge Academy building. 20 years since that reunion. 33 years since he'd graduated, broken and grieving and certain his life was over. He thought about the boy he'd been, scared, angry, alone. He thought about the man he'd become, a father, a mentor, someone who'd learned that strength came not from never falling, but from getting back up. He thought about all the people who'd helped him along the way and all the people he'd been able to help in turn. His phone buzzed. A text from Catherine. Congratulations on 20 years of changing lives. Proud to call you a friend. Another from Brad. Thank you for giving me a chance to be better. Your mother would be proud. One from James. 20 years and you're still the best man I know. Drinks this weekend? And finally from Maya. None of us would be where we are without you. Thank you for showing us what's possible. The world is better because you stopped in the snow. Marcus read each message, his throat tight with emotion, and then typed a response to all of them. Thank you for being part of the journey. None of this would have been possible without you. He put away his phone and stood there a moment longer, breathing in the cool evening air, feeling the weight of the past and the hope of the future settling into something like peace. Some people bloom late, Marcus thought. Some people take the long way around. Some people fall and fail and struggle and barely survive. But if they keep choosing kindness, keep showing up, keep believing that tomorrow might be better than today, well, sometimes those people change everything. Marcus Chen had changed everything, not through grand gestures or dramatic moments, but through small choices made consistently over time. Through stopping in the snow for a stranger, through going to a reunion that terrified him, through accepting help when it was offered, through forgiving people who'd hurt him, through prioritizing presence over perfection and love over fear. And now, watching his granddaughter play in the same park where he'd once fed ducks with his own daughter, where he'd wondered if he'd ever be more than just a struggling single father, Marcus knew that every choice had mattered, every moment of courage, every act of kindness, every decision to be better rather than bitter. They'd all added up to this, a life worth living, a legacy worth leaving, a story worth telling. He walked to his car, climbed in, and drove home through the city he'd never left, past the places that marked his journey, the old apartment building, Morrison's auto repair, the hospital where both his mother and daughter had died and his granddaughter had been born, past all the markers of a life lived fully, imperfectly, authentically. When he got home, he sat down at his desk and pulled out a piece of paper. One more letter, this one for Sarah, his granddaughter, to read someday when she was old enough to understand. Dear Sarah, your grandmother Sarah, the one you're named for, used to say that the measure of a life wasn't in how much you accumulated, but in how much you gave. I didn't understand that when she said it. I was too young, too scared, too focused on just surviving to think about anything bigger. But I understand it now. I'm writing this to tell you that you come from a long line of fighters. Your great-grandmother Chen worked 3 jobs to give her son opportunities. Your grandmother Sarah died protecting you before you were even born. Your mother Lily grew up poor but never let that define her worth. And me? I'm just the guy who kept showing up. That's the secret, sweetheart. There is no secret. You just keep showing up. You choose kindness even when it's hard. You help people even when it costs you something. You forgive even when it hurts. You love even when you're scared. And someday, when you look back at your life, you'll realize that all those small choices added up to something extraordinary. Be brave, little one. Be kind. Be present. Be you. And know that your grandpa loved you with his whole heart. Always, Marcus Chen. He folded the letter carefully and added it to the others, a chronicle of a life built from kindness and courage, ready to be passed down through generations. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Marcus stood at the window, watching the light fade, thinking about all the sunsets that had come before this one and all that would come after. He'd stopped in the snow. He'd gone to the reunion. He'd accepted help. He'd forgiven his enemies. He'd raised his daughter. He'd changed lives. And in the end, that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.